in the year of our Lord. Let's see what time it is. Oh man, it's already 7:18. Oops, my bad. What happens is me and my guests are friends, and so we got together and we just started talking, and we were supposed to start the show, but we just kind of started talking to each other. Next thing I know, I look at the time. It's totally my fault. They were ready. I wasn't. I took a nap. So I'm like half there, but we're going to get all the way there. That's right. Tonight, we're going to bust some Confederate myths, pro-Confederate lost cause mythology myths. We're going to bust them down with graciousness and a little bit of hammer, and or maybe a lot of hammer and a little bit of graciousness. You decide. But we're going to come at the statues and the men behind them and a whole bunch of other stuff. No, we don't hate y'all in the South. No, this is not what the show's about. But look, we gotta believe the truth. We gotta promote the truth. We gotta be about the truth. And so we're gonna do our best to do that because history is important. It matters. So with that, there's some pro-Confederate myths out there. We're gonna tackle them. We're gonna take them down. That's right. And I'm excited about the show because we got two very, very able men jumping on. You'll see their faces in a second. Adam Coleman, whom you know from True ID Apologetics, MJ Jackson, Urban Christian Institute. You definitely want to subscribe to both of those brothers as well. And we'll give out their YouTube channel again, don't worry. In the meantime, hit the like button on this channel. Grab this link and share it. In the background, you hear a brand new Jonathan Soko beat. Jonathan Soko is my man. And every time I play one of his beats, you know what? Send that man a PayPal. Go ahead, send Soko a PayPal. He provides the beats for the show free of charge. Just listen to his beat for a second. Right? Good little intro track. All right, well, you might be hearing some more of those throughout the show. Adam Coleman's prepared a slideshow today, so we're going to have that as well. Again, subscribe to this channel. Subscribe to the other channels as well. We are Urban Apologists. We like to serve the underserved, and we like to look into the often overlooked. Tonight is no exception as we get into this on Street Apologist Live. You know what? Let's go! All right, you guys want to see their faces? Are y'all ready? I'm about to bring you up, and I'm going to bring some applause when you come up. Welcome to Street Apologists Live. Adam Coleman and MJ Jackson. Welcome. It's good to have you.
What's going on, Vocab? What's happening, Matt? What's good with you, bro?
Oh, you look a lot better, MJ. Look at you.
Oh yeah. I was looking like Wesley Snipes for a minute till I turned this light on.
Hey, bro. You like Sammy Sosa, man? You went from dark to light.
Right. Yeah.
Have you seen Sammy Sosa where he looks now? Does anyone know?
Man.
Have you guys know?
Was it like I don't know.
So Sammy Sosa, was in the home run race.
Yeah, I know what Sammy Sosa is. Yeah.
Look up a picture of him real quick. Just put Sammy Sosa 2020. You'll be like, no.
Did you do a Michael Jackson type deal or?
I don't know what, man. Steroids must have some strange after effects or something like that. Anyways,
you got steroid-induced vitiligo or something like that, or?
Yeah, something like that. All right, so real quick, MJ, how do people find your stuff, man?
You can find my stuff by typing in on YouTube the Urban Christian Institute. So you can go ahead and run over there and subscribe. You can also find me on Facebook, the Urban Christian Institute on Facebook, and you can like that page. And I'm going to be releasing some content this week and 4th of July weekend as well.
Oh, MJ. And you guys know that MJ always brings the receipts, and he likes those long CVS ones. Those are those ones that when you run out of toilet paper, you just grab those CVS receipts. You're good. Adam Coleman, True ID Apologetics. He's every urban apologist's role model. What's going on?
That was good with you, bro. I ain't doing nothing, man. Y'all know what it is, man. Hometown hero. Definitely catch me at True ID Apologetics here on YouTube. It's TRUID Apologetics. And I'm excited, man. Actually, I just had my first book club session with my patrons I just started a Patreon-only book club, and we had some folks out the other day. So, I'm riding high, man. I'm excited about it, bro.
All right,
doing some things, man.
It's good to see you copying my ideas and stuff. That's praise God,
man.
Yeah.
We're going through Dr. Seuss. You know what I'm saying? We're starting
something. Right.
Rats.
Oh boy, the cat and that. Okay. All right. Well, you know what? Let's get into this. We're gonna ask this question, guys, and then we're gonna start looking at some slides. The first question is, why would Christian apologists have a show talking about busting up pro-Confederate myths? How does that work? What's your guys' rationale for being involved with this tonight?
All right. Yeah, absolutely. I am a seeker of truth. I hate pseudoscience. I hate pseudo-history. I hate anything that's pseudo. I think that we should embrace those things that are good, that are beautiful, and we should shun those things that God would shun. And so, when examining the history of the Confederacy, there's nothing honorable about them, in my opinion. And that's not said from a place of emotion. That is said from a place of having a biblical worldview. They turned on their country, and they also sought to they sought to justify slavery in the most despicable of means. Some of them tried to pimp Christianity for economic and some of their for economic gains, and that's just that brings about blood in the part of some of the things that we have to do as urban apologists. Is one of the myths that we have to dispel is Christianity being the white man's religion, partially because of its nasty history in the hands of people like the Confederates. So there's just no way in the world that we cannot tell the truth about these guys because it intersects. And so just being a Christian striving to please my Lord and Savior, I got to tell the truth about the Confederates, and there wasn't nothing pretty about them. So that's why I do it.
Well, the Dukes of Hazzard might have made people think otherwise. That's that historical illiteracy that we're getting ready to expose tonight. And so, biblical illiteracy is one thing, but historical illiteracy is another thing. And we're gonna take care of that tonight. You're gonna, in the words of Adam Coleman, I seen him say this to Shaka Utmost. You're gonna learn today. All right, so Adam Coleman. Why do we need to do this? Why do we need to do this tonight, man?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so of course I've got the the YouTube True ID. It stands for the Real You Imago Dei. And I named my podcast and now my YouTube channel that a couple of years ago because the kind of your Afrocentric, ethnocentric groups, what I'm saying, that we deal with in the urban context all the time, that identity issue seemed to have been just real key. What I'm saying? It seemed to be kind of like a centerpiece of everything that we do. And you know what it is, man. I mean, with the Hebrew Israelites and the Comedics and so forth, identity is always mixed up in there. And so I felt like if I could focus on the Imago Dei, which means image of God, then we can call people back to the biblical foundation of who it is that we are, how God made us to be. And so I kind of started, in terms of my public platform of Apologetics, that's kind of, where I started. But even though I was primarily focused on the African-American context when I started applying that lens to other areas and other issues, I realized that Black people aren't the only ones that have an identity problem, as I call it, or this sort of kind of sin-related identity crisis, if you will. And I started seeing that really when it comes to a particular type of nationalism, when it comes to a particular type of taking, white people, for example, they have their idols too, their identity related idols as well. And so for me, it's just a matter of being consistent. It's like if I'm going to go against the Comedic and the Hebrew Israelite and all those, false identity claims there, then I've got to keep that same energy when I encounter a brand of nationalism or esteeming a white heritage that is contradictory to the biblical worldview. And people don't like having their idols shaken up. I mean, it is what it is. But, nowadays we don't make idols of gold anymore. We don't have golden calves, but we have our narratives. We have narratives that we put in our history books that we kind of perpetuate through television and movies and so forth, that become that reflect just untruths about who we are to such an extent that it really causes us to lean on to our flesh in a way that God would have us not to. So for me, this is about the reason why I'm here tonight is the same reason why I'll hop on here another night and do some of the Hebrew Israelites or deal with Comedians. It's the same issue. It just happens to be a different perspective, and particularly and we'll get into this in a minute. But with the Confederates, I've got personal experience. Growing up in the South, MJ, I know you grew up in the South as well, but I've got personal experience. I've seen firsthand what that idolatry looks like. And I think that for much of the country, I don't think that they realize how ingrained this thing is and how insidious it can be. So it's important, man.
Yeah, I have some personal experience, so I grew up mainly in Ohio, and I've always considered myself a Union boy. Ohio, at least where I was from, was proud to be in the Union. And the Underground Railroad, very key components, went through there, and Ohio was proud of that. We just hit 100 viewers, by the way, at least on YouTube. We also are on Periscope and Facebook, so that's good. And then even I know it's a weird example. I gave this example to Adam before, but the NHL hockey team of the Columbus, the city Columbus in Ohio, their National Hockey League team is the Blue Jackets. It's after the uniforms, of course, that the Union soldiers wore. They're called the Blue Jackets, and so there's a reason why they're called the Blue Jackets, and it's for that very reason. Now, that's not, of course, why I necessarily doing tonight's show. The reason why I wanted to do this tonight, though, ladies and gentlemen, is obviously there's been a lot of debate sparked in the culture about Confederate statues, and then that relates to questions about the people being portrayed in the statue. And some of the arguments come back down to there. And during some of those discussions I heard Christians have, and hearing some of those discussions or seeing them online, sometimes in person, I saw some Christians defend things that I thought were indefensible or based upon misinformation. And they were sort of apologetically minded Christians that I was seeing doing this. And so obviously people might think of the names, but remember there's a whole sort of circle of people online. So you're talking to someone influenced by the name or whatever, somebody who's kind of big. You know what I'm saying? You might be talking to someone that people don't know their name, but they're influenced by those ministries, right? Who are having these discussions. And you realize, there's some problems here with your argumentation, what you believe, and if you're going to go to bat defending this as if it's relevant to Christian apologetics, because what I've seen is some of these guys tie these things in as if essentially defending the keeping of Confederate Memorial XYZ is somehow related to preserving Christian culture. And I see things like this, I'm like, well, we're getting all kind of mixed up here. And there's a lot that needs to be said, and we're not going to be able to cover everything tonight. And we're not just going to be talking about statues. We are going to get into history and what it means to celebrate versus educate. You know what I'm saying? There's two different things. But we are going to kind of look at the issues behind it. Because whenever you have these discussions, at least what I've seen is, very quickly you get into people becoming pro-Confederate apologists. And I want us to deal with that tonight. So that's what we're going to do. So, Adam Coleman, are you ready to steal the show?
Oh, yeah, I don't know about all that, man. We'll see what happens. But yeah, before I kind of get into this first slide, I mean, what you said, I think is so important. Several things, and maybe we'll come back to some of it later, but really making that distinction between just properly approaching history or preserving history versus memorializing particularly individuals, movements, and so forth. Like I see a lot of apologists, well, I can't say a lot of apologists, but like you mentioned, some key figures and those who are influenced by them, making this claim, like associating the tearing down of statues, for example, like a Robert E. Lee or whatever, associating those things with something like of communist nature, like, they're trying to erase history. Or I've seen people quote the book 1984, where people are associating what's going on now with the 1984 type of deal where you got Big Brother, I guess, or whoever it would be, just kind of revising history to bring about a certain end or whatever. And one thing I think is important, just real quick, and I won't belabor it too much, but A is, like I said, I mean, we have to be careful to make distinctions between memorializing and just doing historiography. Just handling history versus presenting an aspect of history or an individual from history in a laudatory or an esteeming sort of a way. Those are two very different things. Mm-hmm. Aside from that, real quick, also, there seems to be this presupposition that what has been presented as our history is indeed a reflection of history, of things, how they actually occurred, right? And so what happens is when somebody like myself or you or Matt Jackson, when we present, hey, you know what, this is what you've been taught, and here's some historical references to demonstrate that here's a different aspect of the story that you may not be aware of, then we're accused as if we're doing revisionist history. Right. And I think there's a difference between revisions and corrections, correctives. You know what I'm saying? I think that we have to be careful to make that nuance there as well.
Yeah, we're trying to, and we're not flawless, but to your point, Adam, we're trying to correct revisions. So there was a revisionist history. We're trying to correct it.
Right.
And so exactly right. And so because when Christians take this up as a banner to wave, it's like, hold up, man. Because I don't think Christians have to comment and have an opinion on every little thing that happens in the culture. Sure. I get, though, that they do. And, you mentioned that's a danger of having a public platform. I saw your comment on that. Was very prudent.
Yeah.
But when Christians around you are commenting, then sometimes at least for me, I'm like, well, then I need to comment because some of these responses are off. So maybe we can help steer a little bit better direction. And so just everyone tonight, understand this is a limited conversation. It's not an attack on the South. It's not an attack on it's not an approval, I'll say that rather, of everything that is happening currently in our culture, with every suggestion being made and every cry being uttered at a protest. It's not a sign off on all those. We're specifically focusing on the issues relating to the history behind the Confederate statutes specifically, and as they relate to especially theological matters and how they show up in culture. And so I see it as a somewhat limited but very important and very base discussion. And so I hope everyone understands that. And with that, Adam Coleman, you ready? Because I'm going to flip over to your screen. And it's going to be, for now, it's going to be you in the PowerPoint. And when we kind of open it up, we'll flip back to us too, okay?
All right. And I promise not to be long-winded. Oh, yeah. I get down. So.
Real quick. So you say real quick. All right, here we go. There you go, bro.
Articles of secession. They, at least in their minds, officially departed from the United States of America. Now some people argue this. Now I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but there's argument as to how legitimate that secession was. I mean, some would say that there's no constitutional provision for secession, and therefore it wasn't official. Other people would say, oh no, it really was. And so my thing is just we can let that controversy lay as it is. But nevertheless, they did, at least in their minds, secede from the Union. Now, if their secession is to be taken with some merit, then, they would not be a part of our nation when they were engaged in warfare against America. If their secession is not to be respected, then they were still part of our nation. They were just, wayward, citizens fighting against, United States of America, right? So that's why I have this dilemma here. Were they part of our nation or were they not part of our nation? That's kind of, where we're at. At the end of the Civil War, obviously, the states were allowed to rejoin the Union. So, they're kind of off doing the Confederate thing, fighting against us, and then they rejoin the Union. Now, so that leaves us with
hold on,
what I
real quick. Real quick, just when you started, when I switched over, it was still muted. So just in the beginning part, which what he asked in the beginning was, before we discuss this, we need to ask, who are the Confederates? And so he was answering his question there. Who are the Confederates? I know you just said Adam, but they didn't hear that part. That's my fault.
Okay, cool.
Who are the Confederates? Because if we're talking about Confederate statues and pro-Confederate myths and people in essence defending the Confederacy in the modern day, the question is, okay, who are the Confederates? And there he winded up with that. And right when you heard the audio, he was speaking about the first state to secede. That means to leave the Union, and that was South Carolina. And I want to say something about this. Everyone, this is where we had an election, and a whole part of the country said we don't like it, and so we're gonna leave. I want people to understand how big of a deal that is. This wasn't a coup. It wasn't some kind of illegitimate overthrow of the government. It wasn't anything like this. Was a actual democratic republic. This is a voting people voting. And yes, we understand everybody was not able to vote then, and there's issues with that, and that suffrage for all peoples would come on later. But to those who were allowed to vote at the time, this was a vote, and the vote was for Abraham Lincoln to become president. So the South leaving over that, understand how kind of epically massive of a move that is. I saw one of the movies. Now I always get I believe it was Gods and Generals. Sometimes I get confused.
Yeah, we talked about it.
Yeah, and in there he said, well, I just see it as, let's say you had a social club, and those boys in the social club, everyone voluntarily joined, and then what happened is then boys in the social club started acting up, and you don't want to be part of that social club anymore. And so you just say, hey, I'm going to leave your social club. And that's really all I'm doing. It's nothing more to it. And he said, no, that's not what it did. That's not all that was happening. This it's not just a social club. This is basically, and that's why they're called rebels. Now, I like Star Wars, right? You see BB-8 in the background. So I'm inclined to think rebels, fighting against the Empire, right? But no, these rebels it was a rebellion against the United States government. That's why the Union soldiers called them Johnny Reb or Johnny Rebel. That was their name. They were the rebels. They did their rebel yell when they came out. You know what I'm saying? These were rebels. And so it's very important to understand, and we're going to get into the secessionist documents at some point. I don't want to spoil people's fun on that, but I did want to say that, and I apologize for the audio not being there and that, but I think I caught up on everything. But since we're on the screen together, MJ or Adam, comment on that before we go on to the next slide.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, like to your point, I mean, it wasn't just a bunch of people, fussing about something. I mean, Lincoln was democratically elected. And actually, I don't want to spoil this either, but I mean, it's very telling that it was the election of Lincoln that was the straw that broke the camel's back.
Right. If the other guy would have won, who was the other guy? I just forgot. What's wrong with me?
Nah, you forgot. I forgot. Douglas. Wasn't it Douglas?
I think it was Douglas because it was Lincoln-Douglas debates. It had to be because it was the Lincoln-Douglas debates. Jeez, man, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So yeah, if the other guy would have won, they wouldn't have left.
Right. So, I mean, that says a lot, and we'll kind of come back to that or whatever. But, I mean, you're right. I mean, these people, they seceded from the Union. They issued official declarations that they were leaving, and then they end up drafting their own constitution, which we'll get back to later. You know what I'm saying? So these are people that, at least in their minds, believe that they have departed from the Union. It wasn't just some little squabble or whatever. It's just things that maybe the point that you were trying to make. So everybody's pretty much caught up, right? Though I mean, with that, I think we covered everything, right?
Yeah, and I mean, they had their own thing, the Confederate States of America. And by the way, that's the flag. I'm going to get into this later in relationship to the flag that people think is a Confederate flag. I'm going to get into it a little bit, but this is their actual official flag. That's the flag of the Confederate States of America right there. But Adam, I'm going to switch back over and I'll let you go. And again, I apologize for that, guys, but here we go.
No, you're good.
All right, there we go.
Yeah, so that's the question. So, the question is, who were the Confederates? And so, again, they seceded from the Union. They drafted their own constitution. I mean, they, at least in their minds, believed that they were a separate entity from, what would have been known as the United States at that time. Okay, so here's the thing. They lose the war, and then they end up being grafted back in, if you will, to the Union. They're able to, rejoin in some sense or another. So that leaves us with this question. At the time when they were fighting against America, were they part of our nation? Meaning, that their articles of secession were not officially recognized, that we shouldn't honor it, and they were just wayward, citizens fighting against the United States. Or were they not part of our nation? As in, their secession was legitimate, and they were their own freestanding Confederate States of America. Well, now here's the dilemma. If those are our two options, then what happens is, we're left with this here. Either A, if they were part of our nation, then they were traitors. Or B, if they were not part of our nation, then the Confederates were enemies, right? Now, the question then becomes for us today, okay, well, in our public spaces, in either case, why should we memorialize, commemorate, honor, and esteem in our public spaces either enemies or traitors, right? The Confederates were either traitors or they were enemies. There's really no other. I can't think of any other category for them, right? It's got to be one or the other. And either way, why should we memorialize traitors or enemies? So if we're going to memorialize traitors, for example, then we need to give Benedict Arnold, we need to give him a statue or something like that. Anybody who's that guy, Aldrich, something or other, spies against the nation and the double H's and all kinds of, let's give some memorials to them. Or if they were traitors, or if they were enemies, then let's give Hitler a statue. Let's give, anybody, pick somebody that we fought against, Bin Laden, whoever, right? Let's memorialize them too. It really makes no sense.
It's part of history, right?
It's part of history. Now,
real quick, to the super chatters. Okay. Shout out to Connor Terrell. He says, love from the former capital of the Confederacy. A lot of myths that need to be busted, and I'm glad you're tackling this. Thank you, Connor, and I appreciate that, you hopefully you can see this is not about an attack on anybody who lives south of the Mason-Dixon line or anything like that. I got family in Alabama. I got family in Florida. I got family in those. So it's not about that, man, and much love back at you, man, and that's good to hear. And also shout out to Michelle Marie in the chat. All right, now you got this thing on the screen. Are you actually going to talk about it or what, bro?
Yeah, what on the
Your
screen?
PowerPoint's on the screen, but it says the birth of a nation.
Oh, it's on the wrong page?
I don't know. What did it not? Is it not flipping through?
Oh shoot! It must be on the wrong.
Here,
it must be on the wrong.
Change.
It should be on.
Around change your button. You're saying that it's supposed to be on a different one? Oh, weird.
Yeah.
Hold on, am I controlling it? No, I'm not controlling it. I see your little button down there, but it's only on the birth of a nation. It's only been on that the whole time.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't know why. Oh, that's weird. Because it says it lets you share a screen. So let me see what's going on here. So you're saying you have on it on something different?
Yeah, you're killing me. You're killing me, Smalls.
Well, I don't know. That's all I see on here. Let me see
that's what I see as well.
Yeah, that's what he sees as well.
He sees what?
He sees Birth of a Nation as well.
Birth of a Nation. Yep.
Oh, that's weird.
I don't see any way I can control your.
What about now?
Let's see, is there a way I can? No, it's still on there. Let me see here. Is there a way I can? You know what? It was weird because earlier when you were flipping through, I was seeing everything you had. Remember? When we did this. So that doesn't make sense.
I'm up here thinking I'm killing the game, and I'm looking crazy.
Let me see what it could be here. Let me try.
Well, I guess they still got the, well, they still heard the argument, though, so I guess we should be okay on that. But
yeah.
I don't. You know what you might have to do is unshare the screen every time because it's not showing different slides.
Okay.
You know what?
Let me try. All right, let me try to.
If that doesn't work, if you can, send me your thing on email, and I'll do it from my end. If that's what's going on, you might have
to tell me what's happening now.
We see ourselves.
All right. What about?
Sorry, guys. I'm just trying to get this shared screen situation taken care of.
No, that's good.
Yeah, it was on the Birth of a Nation the whole time. Hey, shout out to D News. Shout out to Nate. Shout out to Cynico. Been a while since I've seen you. How you doing? Shout out to Fred Sanford. Been a while since I've seen you. How you doing as well? Who else we got up in here? I mean, there's a lot of people. I'm not
What about now?
Okay, I see it now. I see the right. I see. You know what? I wonder if it's gonna make you keep it on that mode, like the mode where you can see it on the side instead. It might want you to stay on that mode or something.
Okay.
And I guess that's okay if that's it doesn't look as pretty, but it's all right. It is what it is. You know what I mean?
Oh, did it switch just now? Like, what do you see right now?
Categorizing content. Who are the Confederates? Yep.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah. It might just have to stay there.
Okay, yeah, no problem. It's not going to be as pretty. It looks like it doesn't want you go into the share screen mode. It wants you to stay in that other mode, and that's okay. All right, so go ahead, Adam Coleman. Sorry. So who were the Confederates, part of our nation or not part of our nation, and articles that should rejoin the Union? Okay, I think we covered that. What else you got?
Yeah, so it's got to be one or the other. And at the end of the day, the question is, if they were part of our nation, they were traitors. If they were not part of our nation, they were enemies. And the question for us today is, in our public spaces, that's the key, in our public spaces, why should we memorialize enemies or traitors? And my answer would be I think that there's no good reason to do that. There's no good reason to think that the general public should memorialize enemies and or traitors just because a segment of the public, doesn't want to let them go. But yeah, I think MJ was going to say something on that, or
yeah. Furthermore, they drew first blood with the Battle of Fort Sumter, if I'm not mistaken.
That was it. Yep.
Yeah,
it was Sumter.
So it wasn't like that the big bad federal government drew first. No, they drew first blood. Seriously.
It was funny.
And then turn around and call it the War of Northern Aggression.
That's exactly what I was about to say. And also, Stonewall believed in total war. Of course, Sherman, Jackson did as well. They both believe in total war. And a key thing that Robert E. Lee wanted to do was to take the war to the North. And so, when they were over, if people will think about it, where did Gettysburg happen? Pennsylvania. It didn't happen down there. It happened in the North. It happened in Pennsylvania. That's where Gettysburg is. Meaning they were taking the war into the North. And those Northerners at the time were like, hey, I thought the battle was going to be like far away from here, down there or something. We didn't realize these guys were going to be coming in. So that's exactly what I'm just just saying with that. So that's important to recognize. And look, There's a book about this, and MJ mentioned this. We both had this book, The Lost Indictment of Robert E. Lee. Here it is on my Kindle. The Forgotten Case Against an American Icon. This is a really good book, and what it does is it shows how Lincoln, they were indicting the Confederate leadership. They basically were going to give pardons to the average run of the mill, the average Joe. They're going to give pardons to the average Johnny Reb, as it were. But the leadership of the Confederacy, like Davison, Robert E. Lee, those guys, they were going to be charged, and it kind of fell through. What's crazy is it was lost literally, that this didn't happen, but it was actually lost symbolically as well. For a long amount of time, historians did not have the actual papers. It had to get rediscovered in archives. It's kind of a wild thing. And so that didn't happen. I don't know, just to prove the point that the government also understood this as like, you have cost American lives by these actions, and there should be what do we do? We'll give traitors a fair trial, but you're going to be charged with treason, and we're going to go down the list, and we're going to see if you're guilty or not. Now that didn't happen. I don't know if you want to say something on that before we go on to the next point there, MJ, because I know you got into that stuff as well.
Well, yeah. Well, furthermore, this is an issue of consistency, because what do we do with traitors? Okay. And I talked to Troy Gauze earlier today, and he shared some information with me that I did not know. Now, he shared some information with me about the abolitionist John Brown. And John Brown was a white guy, but he was a white guy who advocated for abolition using the method of armed insurrection.
He was about that life. He was like a white Nat Turner or something like that.
Yes, he was about that life, and he was not playing any games. And when it finally caught up with him, and his day came where he was captured, General Robert E. Lee looked down at him while he was lying there in his own pool of blood. He said, "Why did you do it?" John Brown said, "Hey, I did it because of the Golden Rule, and slavery is coming to an end." But what happened with John Brown? John Brown was convicted of. He wasn't technically convicted of treason because what Robert E. Lee should have done was handed him over to the federal courts, but he handed him over to the state, and John Brown was hanged. But he was considered a traitor for attacking his own country and also sacking an arms depot as well.
So you're making the point. He's making the point, everybody. Look what good old Robert E. Lee, look what Bobby Lee did to John Brown and his mitts, and yet look how Bobby Lee got treated. He didn't get handcuffs. He got a statue on a horse.
He got a statue on a horse. Now, if we're going to be consistent, this man is a traitor. And even with what he said about the Confederate flag, he told his own men to put that flag away. This is Robert E. Lee talking. Put the flag away. It's a symbol of division. Maybe he was trying to save his own neck and didn't want anybody to see that flag because that flag would have demonstrated that he was fighting up under a foreign banner. But the man was a traitor. And if a Christian is going to be consistent, and we got somebody who has a favorite tagline that always says, "Inconsistency is a sign of a failed argument." Well, inconsistency is a sign of a failed argument. I'm going to just throw it right back at you.
You know what, Adam and MJ, let's not spend too much time with the live chat, but man, we got to spend a little bit. So let's try to do this quick. Ricky Lee says, is the Statue of Liberty next? Shaking my head. Ricky Lee, I'm going to say my version. You guys can say something or not. Let me tell you what, Ricky Lee, we can distinguish between those who are trying to tear the United States apart and divide it versus those who are trying to build it. So the Statue of Liberty, I understand, is not a real person, but if you're going to get into Statue of Liberty and then you're going to say, well, what about Washington and Jefferson? And hey, Donald Trump tried to make this argument. He's like, what about Jefferson? Do you like Jefferson? He had slaves, so you're going to take him down? You're going to take him down too? Check this out. We can distinguish between rebels, secessionists, treasonous traitors versus people who are trying to found a country. I think we can distinguish that. Now, I don't know if y'all want to say something like that, but we are not arguing for the removal of all these.
I'm going to be quick, Adam.
Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. Uh-oh.
This is what I say to atheists. Questions are not arguments. Questions are not arguments, and that was kind of a silly question at that, and it demonstrates that I don't feel like the other side is listening to the points that are being made about what Vocab just said regarding a person who's trying to tear down America, which is a traitor or a rebel or an enemy. Make your choice, and people who are building America. And I expect Christians to be able to make these distinctions. I really do, because we are to worship God, not only with our spirit, not only with our body, but in our heart, but also with our mind.
And I mean, even if it's just general revelation, hopefully Ricky Lee, and maybe you're related to Robert E. Lee. Maybe that's why you're about this.
Maybe. That's possible. Yeah.
It's like, yo, if we can't tell the difference between those who are dividing the country in half and then attacking our army, the United States Army, if we can't distinguish between those and those who are helping to found the nation in its infancy, then I don't know. We're not gonna be able to tell nothing apart.
Well, I mean, I think that's the issue, is that there's so many different layers to this that I think a lot of people don't appreciate. But it's not just a matter of, and I'm not talking about just the random looters and rioters who are just going around creating mayhem. I'm talking about people who are really thoughtful on this topic. You know what I'm saying? I think that's what we're discussing here. And what we're looking at is we have individuals who are in our public spaces. I keep emphasizing that because that's the key. In public spaces, it should reflect, you know what I'm saying? It reflects the public. I mean, that's like by definition, right? And so the question is, should we memorialize traitors and enemies, in our public spaces? And I would argue that the answer is no, because I can't think of any nation, where that's the case. Like, it's not representative. These enemies and traitors aren't representative of what America is about. I mean, by definition, because if they were representative of what America was about, then they wouldn't have been enemies and traitors. They wouldn't have to dissent from America in terms of what they were about if they were representative of America. But what's so funny to me, I said this the other day, is like some folks have such angst and anger towards like a Colin Kaepernick and these other football players for taking a knee towards the flag, but yet they want to resist people who are trying to remove memorials of individuals who shot bullets, at the flag that represents that same Union. Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, all these other folks, they literally warred against the flag, and yet they're mad at Kaepernick for taking a knee. So the whole point is, in terms of public spaces, when we're dealing with, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson. Now I'll be upfront, where I stand in relation to those guys is probably I don't really have an affinity for them in the same way that some other people do. So I could care less, quite frankly. But just logically speaking, they're not in the same category as those who made war against the country.
I think I need to stop there because I see Arno, and I know you're trying to think through this, Arno. I've seen you around here and there, so it's all love. But she says we're not going to be able to have a single monument up because everyone has a checkered past. If that was the essence of our argument, I would understand what you're saying. But that's not the essence of the argument. We haven't even got into Robert E. Lee's checkered past, really, which we're going to get into. The argument is, who are the Confederates? That's why Adam began with sort of step one. So we are not talking about all monuments everywhere. And that's why I tried to say in the beginning as well, this is a limited conversation tonight. It's sort of like one step at a time. Not that we can't have those other conversations, but you're here talking tonight just specifically about this. This is why this was pro-Confederate myths busted, right? I'm trying to say too much too quick. And so we understand that, every human, despite whatever great achievements, we're radical sinners. We are sinners to the bone. All have fallen short, right? And so we recognize that. So our argument here tonight is not just saying, well, look, this person did X, Y, Z, therefore we can never commemorate the good things they did. We are talking about Confederates. My argument is no Confederate leader in any way should have statues on United States public property at all, period.
At all. At all. This is the Taliban, for Christ's sake. Might as well be.
No, but seriously, I know you're joking, but really at the time, you know what I'm saying? Now, granted, maybe we wouldn't consider them to be a terrorist organization, but they were an enemy army. It's like literally.
And
right?
There's a lot of rumors and fact to it, too. I'm saying rumors because we can't confirm everything about specifically, and I understand we could say, oh, war, whatever, the way the Confederates treated Union prisoners. Now, the man of the book I just read, The Lost Indictment of Robert E. Lee, he tries to be very fair. He says, can we blame Robert E. Lee for the treatment in some of the camps? And he said, no, he did not have direct oversight of those operations. He said, I don't think it's fair. And remember, he wrote The Lost Indictment of Robert E. Lee. So, he's not a fan, right? Hashtag not a fan. But with that, he said, we can't blame Lee directly for that. However, we can blame the Confederacy, though, for the way that the Union soldiers were said to be treated. And I forget the camp's name. I can look it up. There's a notorious one, actually.
Fort Pillow.
There's a different one I'm thinking of. I know there's two.
Oh, okay.
The other one ends in Ville or something like that. I'll look it up.
Okay.
But it's a real thing. But yeah, that's a real thing of the way they were treated. So we're talking about some serious stuff. You know what I'm saying? There's a lot of American lives lost over this.
Well, yeah, really, I think it's just within like the last 10 years or so that all the other wars that Americans fought combined finally caught up to how many lives were lost in the Civil War. That's how bloody it was, But to your point, like, just to make it very clear, like, this argument that I presented thus far, it doesn't hinge upon the moral fiber of Robert E. Lee or lack thereof. It's not just, okay, this person was a bad guy and therefore we need to get rid of his statue.
Right.
So I'm not just talking about that. What I'm talking about is the status. I'm saying this individual occupies the status of either being an enemy of America or a traitor to America. You know what I'm saying? And so regardless of who he is, regardless of what he was like as an individual, is really irrelevant, to what I've said so far. I'm saying that we should not, basically I'm arguing we should not memorialize enemies and traitors in public spaces. And I don't think that's irrational. I don't know any nation, where they're just running around commemorating, those people that they fought against. I don't, that's just silly, So there you go.
No doubt. And there is yeah, at some point, Jennifer, we're gonna have to deal with your comments. She
What's that?
Well, we have someone who, and again, we we respect people's, whatever, but she's definitely maybe playing the role there she might be playing the role of a pro-Confederate apologist. You know what I'm saying?
All right.
To compare Osama bin Laden and terrorists to free people of this country that refused to pay the 47% tax tariff because the South had all the ports is mind-boggling. So there she's she's trying to almost equate it, it sounds like, if I understand the argument, with what happened at the American Revolution or the American War for Independence. Meaning, oh, well, the taxes levied against the South were unfair.
But again, here's the thing. My argument is independent of whether the Confederates had a legitimate cause or not.
Exactly.
Let's say that the cause was legitimate, which obviously I don't think it was. Let's say that it was. Notice, I'm not arguing that because they were all about slavery, therefore we shouldn't have memorialized them. I'm not saying that because their cause was wrong. My argument is independent of that. I'm saying that based upon being in the status of either an enemy or a traitor, it's irrational to memorialize people like that in public spaces. So whether their cause is just or not, doesn't matter. As far as my argument is concerned.
Yeah, and she says, we thought it would be a great idea, but in the contract, if it was the federal government decided to be rogue, then any one of the states could say, all right, I'm done here, and that's about it. The ironic thing is, the southern states are the ones who went rogue, not the federal government.
Yes, and they attacked first.
Yes, and remember, this was in response to an election. Not they try to make about all this other stuff. When Lincoln won, they decided to leave. And so we got to really deal with that reality. And oh man, you do realize that there are free people of color in Louisiana that own businesses, that own plantations, that were married, that held office. Okay, let's just say that's true, Jennifer. Let's just say that's true. Jennifer, let me ask you this. Could any white person legally be the slave? Could they be a slave in the same way a black person was at that time? And let's make it even more. Could let's say these people that you're talking about Louisiana exist. Could you have white people be their slaves? This is not some kind of equal thing. Well, go ahead.
Okay, yo, can I got a slide for that, as a matter of fact.
All right, yeah.
Since we're going there, can we bring up this slide right here?
Yeah. I'll bring it up right. And by the way, Jennifer, it's all love, but you are playing the role of a pro-Confederate apologist. So this is really exactly what we're talking about.
You're going to learn today.
All right, here we go. All right, go ahead, bro. What you got? It's up right there. Oh, there you go. I'm glad you had this.
There we go.
Break it down. Do it.
Now this right here is an excerpt from the Confederate States of America Constitution, right? This is Article 3, Section 2.3, right? Now, I'm not gonna read the whole thing, but it's right there in red. It's talking about basically what they can do in their territories, and it's saying in all such territory, referring to territory that's controlled by the Confederate States, in all such territory, the institution of Negro slavery, as it now exists in the Confederate States, shall be recognized and protected by Congress and by the territorial government.
What kind of slavery? What kind of slavery?
Negro slavery.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So they're very specific in terms of what it is that they were protecting there. Negro slavery as it now exists in the Confederate States.
But I thought this war wasn't about slavery, Adam Coleman.
Well, I mean, they thought enough of it to put it in their Constitution.
And if you read every single of one of the state's individual secessions, it's almost as if they were obsessed with slavery.
Yes. They wanted to expand slavery westward into the West territories. And Lincoln here, and here's another myth that we're going to destroy. Okay. Lincoln did not care for slavery, and he wanted to send black people to another country, so to speak, another continent, so to speak. But Lincoln most definitely thought that slavery hurt the poor working white person. Lincoln was looking out for the poor working white person, and he did not want to allow slavery to expand into the Western territories. Furthermore, he said that the Southern territories, they could keep slavery. For all intents and purposes, they could keep slavery, but we're just not going to allow it to expand.
That's what's crazy. So think about this. It's almost like, hey, okay, y'all want to keep, we'll let you, it basically will preserve it as it is, the status quo. But in these new territories, you're not going to be putting slavery out there. So the South elite, whatever you want to say, the leadership were so bent on the cause of slavery that they couldn't even accept that. It was like, no, it's got to expand as well as the nation expands. This is a radical rebel cause. And you know what's wild? I looked into this recently. I don't have all the details of this, but Jesse James, I know it's weird to bring this about a new era. Jesse James and many of the outlaws like him, the way they got their start was in Missouri as pro-Confederates, and they took part in summary executions of Northern sympathizers in Missouri. Because if you look back on our history, I know we live in a crazy time. Man, living in Missouri during that time would have been super crazy. You had a state literally at war with itself. It was like miniature civil war, but really bloody, like a lot more worse in a lot of ways from what I've been able to read historically than even a lot of the rest of the Civil War, because it was like all-out warfare on the population as well. Jesse James and a lot of his gang got a start in that. If you guys don't know who Jesse James is, to the chat, to people watching, famous outlaw in American history, killed probably up to 20 people. And here's what happened. Here's why I bring this up. He got a lot of popular sympathy, and the reason was because of the South's spin on Jesse James. Jesse James, there's no evidence he was a Robin Hood, but yet that's how he was painted. He never shared any of the money he got from his train robberies and his bank robberies with any normal person. There's no evidence of that, and there's evidence of him killing innocent people. There is evidence of that, and yet he was portrayed as some kind of freedom fighter. The original thing that he was called a bushwhacker, a freedom fighter against the North in the Missouri territories. That's what they called. They're called bushwhackers back then. And he transitioned into pure outlaw, and the South kept up this media spin, and the elements of the press they had access and power to where it became Jesse James was like a nationally revered person, primarily because of the South sympathy towards him. And he was a Confederate himself. He was all about that life. And so my point by saying that is a very fascinating thing, because the idolization of some of these people were actually cold-blooded killers. Jesse James was not a good person. He was not a nice guy. He did not help anybody out but himself. And yet he ended up being romanticized because of the South's view of like, well, he's fighting Northerners. And so there's a lot of problems. There's a whole lot of problems when we talk about these issues. And if someone doesn't believe what I'm talking about, watch the movie The Assassination of Jesse James with Brad Pitt, and then while you're watching it, read about the historical realities surrounding it, and you'll see what I'm saying is true. I'm not saying the movie talked about what I'm talking about, but I'm saying I kind of like to do that. You watch a movie, then you kind of look at it, and you look at the stuff while you're looking at it, and you'll see exactly what I'm saying is true, because he's not the only one. There's a whole bunch of these basically thugs that the South was like, hey, you guys are cool because you're taking care of Northerners, and this is real reality. So I know we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves.
Well, no, I mean, but to your point though, and I'm going to be real quick with this, but I was just on with BK Apologist the other day. We were responding to Candace Owens and her comments about, she said something to the effect of only black people take the lowest common denominator among them, or the lowest denominator among them, and make them martyrs and heroes and so forth. And what I think is interesting is that actually it's really the other way around, in the sense that with the Confederacy specifically, you see a group of people who have the cultural leverage, if you will, to take villains and make them heroes. But not only that, to impose them in the history books to such an extent that it's not only their heroes, it makes them your heroes. And they can put them in public spaces.
That's a real thing. I grew up hearing in Ohio. And again, I told you, we were proud to be a union. I grew up hearing about how classy Robert E. Lee was, and how Grant was a sloppy drunk who couldn't get himself together. He was brain dead when it came to taxes compared to Robert E. Lee. And I come to find out later that's not a complete true picture at all about the man on the $50 bill. You know what I'm saying? Not saying Grant was perfect either, but I'm just saying the way he was portrayed even there. And the reason is there's a real paper trail to this. Ladies and gentlemen, just like if you go back and say, why are there so many statues? The Daughters of the Confederacy and all the groups like them who got a hold of politicians and started putting these all up as these are later development to preserve the lost cause in marble, if you will. And then you also have the situation where they got a hold of the textbooks, and they would not accept certain textbooks if they were unfair to the South. And they even started a library campaign where people would actually stamp books in the front unjust to the South if it portrayed a non-pro-Confederate view. They literally got their hands around the throat of a lot of the educational institutional system. And it's a bizarre thing, because people always say history is written by the winners. A lot of times there's some truth to that.
Not necessarily.
Not this time. Not this time. The South got, and this is a reality. And again, the paper trail was there. If you don't like what we're saying, get a hold of it. And I know we're not going to be driven by the live chat, but I can't help it a little bit. Jennifer's coming back, and she's bringing this. You might have a slide for this. MJ, I'm going to let you start on this, because we all have something to say about this, but I'm going to let you start on this. It's sad that she believes this, and that's why we're going to bust a myth. She says, Robert E. Lee actually inherited slaves. True there, but watch what she says here. You know what he did with them? He let them go as soon as he got them.
The devil is a liar.
That is not true. That is not true. That is not true. That is not true. Okay, go ahead, MJ, and we'll tack on if we need to. But this is so not true.
Right.
All right. First and foremost, he inherited those slaves by marriage, and his wife's father had pretty much an agreement that he was going to let those slaves go as soon as
it's 5 years, wasn't it? Was it after 5 years that he died? Something like that?
Yeah, within 5 years after the estate was settled and things like that.
He was legally supposed to do that.
He was legally supposed to do it. Well, Robert E. Lee didn't necessarily want to do it. Robert E. Lee wanted to do what he wanted to do, which was interpreted the man's will the way he wanted to interpret it. Furthermore,
hey, can you go a little bit more in the center of the screen? You got a little corner. Okay. Yeah, there you go. Okay, go ahead.
It's that Southern lean. He's in his bag right now. That's what that is.
Every time he starts speaking, he goes like this. But when it's just him sitting, he's in the middle of the screen. He's like, okay.
So the slaves ran away because they had sense. They knew what was going on. The slaves got up out of there because they said, we consider ourselves free. Well, Robert E. Lee had them recaptured.
But hold on. Didn't he say in the process, I read a quote where he basically said, kind of like sometimes what cops tell you, well, who are they going to believe? You know, me or you? I thought he said that at one point to them in relation to that. But now, everybody, it's about to get worse. And if we could read this or you could paraphrase it, but again, the paper trail is there. Jennifer, it's going to get bad. Listen to what the good old kindly Robert E. Lee did to these recaptured slaves.
Look, I'm paraphrasing, but it sounds like this lady needs some receipts. So I'm just going to read a little something for you. On March 26, 1866, the New York Daily Tribune, a widely read anti-slavery newspaper founded by Horace Greeley, published a shocking report of account of Lee's actions in 1859 by a former Arlington slave named Wesley Norris. Here is the testimony in its entirety. Okay, my name is Wesley Norris. I was born a slave on the plantation of George P. Custis. After the death of Mr. Custis, General Lee, who had been made the executor of the estate, assumed control of the slaves in the number about 70. It was the general's impression among the slaves that Mr. Custis that on his death they should be forever free. In fact, this statement has been made to them by Mr. C. years before. So they were under the impression that, and I'm not going to read it because it's a lot of it, but they were under the impression that they was going to go free. And if you need to see this, you can find it. It's in the book that we by John Reeves that we brought up, The Lost Indictment of Lee. But you should check it out. But the fact of the matter is, Robert E. Lee did not. He's sure. I'm trying to keep my words right because this is just crazy.
He sure as heck. Adam Coleman, you got way down on your screen all of a sudden.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah.
That's all right. If you laying back, you laying back.
He sure as heck didn't free them immediately. So that's another one of the myths that we're tearing up. And I would just challenge Christians to use the same things that we would use when dealing with an atheist or a skeptic, when we're making an argument for the historical reliability of the resurrection and things like we're doing the same thing. So we got receipts, but he didn't set them free. Robert E. Lee had to be forced by the courts to set these slaves free. And this was after he caught them. This was after he had them beat. This was after that he told the I believe it was the constable to put brine on their backs after he laid it on them good.
Ugh. And that's a quote, everybody. Laid it on them good is a quote. Laid it on. Now I could see the Robert E. Lee apologist now, but he didn't beat him himself.
He beat the girl.
Yeah, and see, that's what's so wild. Now listen, I'm gonna read page 5 of that book. During the closing days of the war, Johnson had solemnly vowed to punish traitors and believed General Ulysses S. Grant's terms with Lee at Appomattox were too lenient. On one occasion, Johnson told an audience that death would be too easy a punishment for traitors like Lee and other Confederate leaders. The New York Times, which led the way back then in making the case against Lee, argued that he had levied war against the United States more strenuously than any other man in the land, and therefore has been especially guilty of the crime of treason as defined by the Constitution of the United States, end quote. The newspaper Ohio Farmer harshly declared Robert E. Lee is now so poor that he is not. This quote is messed up, but it's also bars. Listen to this, everybody. It's from the Ohio Farmer, quote, Robert E. Lee is so poor now that he is not the wherewith to clothe himself. If this be true, let the government relieve him at once. Give him 10 feet of rope and 6 feet of soil.
Dang, yo.
Yeah, put him down.
That's some bars right there.
That's some
bars right there. If every traitor earned this reward, Lee surely is the one, end quote. The Cleveland Morning Leader wrote that Lee had been Judas-like in betraying his country. So by the way, notice what we're saying is not a brand new sentiment. It's just been sort of lost on the traitorous element of what he's doing, what these guys did. Now listen to this part. Around that time, Lee's views on race and slavery were also criticized by many of his contemporaries who objected to his attempt at portraying himself as a kind and humane slaveholder, which apparently some people still believe today. Soon after an appearance before a committee of the U.S. Congress in early 1866, Lee was accused in the press of ordering the whipping of several of his slaves after they had tried to run away. Now remember, what's the reason why they tried to run away? We just discussed that. According to the testimony of a former slave named Wesley Norris, Lee had frequently told the overseer to lay it on well during a brutal assault. After the whippings, Lee allegedly ordered the overseer to wash the slaves' backs with brine. Upon the publication of this account, Lee bitterly complained to friends in private, but never defended himself publicly against the accusations. As for the treason charges, Lee believed, quote, Virginia, in withdrawing herself from the United States, carried me along as a citizen for Virginia, and her laws and her acts were binding on me, end quote. So we just got to deal with that. And then Jennifer says, well, you know, only 6% of the people that fought for the Confederates Army owned slaves. You know, Louisiana's first National Guard was all black. There were officers in the Confederate Army, not just infantry. Look, I hear this a lot about who owned slaves and who didn't own slaves.
Right.
But I'm just going to take it right here, and you guys can again comment. The private journals of Confederate soldiers that we still have.
We got them.
These show that even the non-slave holding Confederate soldier was utterly consumed, or at least we'll say preoccupied. Not every single person, yes, but we see a heavy emphasis on defending the ability to hold slaves. And because remember, that would be a sign of wealth. So they may be like, well, one day I might give me some slaves.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So
they may have mobility.
They may have not had them then, but they're in the army. You don't know what can happen in war. It's a way to get promoted. You might get out and like, I'm gonna have me some, just like Lee, right? Yeah. I'm gonna wash them backs with brine. And so you sorry, I'm trying to. So the thing is, we see from private journals, and I went immediately there to show you these are the private thoughts of Confederate soldiers, that they were concerned with slaveholding and the black people around them having their proper place. That's a reality. I don't know if you guys want to share something on that.
Well, no, I mean, and I'm to chime in on what you just said. So first of all, Jennifer should be aware that there was actually a law passed in the South, you know, midway through the war, that if you had like so many slaves, like I think it was like maybe 25 or something like that, you could be exempted from fighting on the front line. You know, which actually caused a little bit of angst amongst the rest of them, because they were, hey, we're still, you know, these poor white boys out here fighting, you know, while the rich ones can go back to the crib. You know, so that was a source of soreness right there. But aside from that, but you're absolutely right in that even though you had, let's say you were just a poor white person, didn't have a slave to your name, you know, in their mind, they were still better than an N-word. You know what I'm saying? Like, we have to understand that this concept of racism and white supremacy undergirded, like that sinful disposition undergirded the institution of slavery. So when you're talking about the Civil War, you're not just dealing with the institution of slavery, you're dealing with the foundational layer underneath that, which was this notion of white supremacy and racism. And even if you didn't own a slave, you can still fight for that. I'm saying, because the rich, you know, slave owner back home is saying, hey man, you know what, you're one of us, right? You know, you're still better than that N-word. You're one of us.
Yeah, I can be down and out, low and all, but I'm still better than.
Y'all know what it is. And so you can't take that part out. Now here's what, this is going to sound kind of strange, but here's where I'm actually slightly sympathetic with the Confederacy. That's going to sound weird. But one thing I will say is this, is that it is often cast that there's this definitive line where the South was the bad guys, racists, and the North was all like the good guy heroes. And it is true that the historical reality is a little more nuanced than that. I'm saying racism wasn't just contained in the South. We know that because even after the Civil War, you see a slew of lynchings up in the North, particularly like places like Boston
It was
and
like
so
race
forth.
riots
Right?
up there.
Yeah, and,
Right.
and later
And so-
on, now this is in the 1920s and 30s, I believe, but later on, remember, people from the Confederacy would actually still be alive in the 20s and 30s, you know,
course.
children and older. The biggest place for Klan membership when the Klan was revitalized later on was in Indiana. And so that's a point. And I saw BK Apologist in the live chat earlier. Shout out to him. Subscribe to his channel. You know, he's in
Shout out to
Brooklyn.
BK.
Check this out. There were riots in New York when the draft was instituted. Everyone needs to remember the Civil War required a draft of American troops. So this is a big deal, right? You know, we've had these wars in Iraq. No draft, though. The Civil War did, and here's what happened in New York, a couple places. The draft riots turned into race riots, and it appears the sort of rationale of the mob. Everyone talks about, you know, the mob. Yeah, the mob, but it's not just leftists that do mobs. There's all kinds of flavors of all kinds of people that get mobs, and it's not just people adding you, you know, and getting ratioed on Twitter. These mobs, they said, hey, we don't want to go down. We don't want to go lose our life for some. I'm not trying to fight for some, you're going to draft me, and no. And guess what? These turned into those protests where I don't know all the numbers. This is something, there's a lot to learn here. They ended up getting violent with folks of color. I'll just put it that way. In New York.
In New York.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
And you got to remember too, like, you know, later on down the road, I mean, you know, just, you know, dealing with like, once you kind of get into the Great Migration era and all those kind of things, the Irish, for example, were not considered to be so-called white. You know what I'm saying? The Irish and like Eastern Europeans, they weren't like white
Sicilians,
in the same sense
bro.
of today.
Sicilians, bro.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, you weren't white.
Speaking of Louisiana, you know who was lynched in Louisiana? Sicilians were lynched in New Orleans. There's a whole movie called Vendetta that portrays it. They blamed the Italians, the Sicilians, for killing the chief police, and they end up killing a bunch of them. It was a mob action. It's crazy. Besides what happened to some Chinese later on, I guess it was the biggest like mass version of that. Anyways, it's a wild story, but go ahead.
But yeah, well, just my point is that, you know, in the North, at least in some localities, you know, groups like the Irish would have been, economically speaking, like the underclass, or looked down upon in the same way that white folks look down upon Africans, but maybe slightly, you know, less severe. So anyway, during the Great Migration, when you have, you know, African Americans coming up to the North, started taking jobs, you know, next thing you know, I mean, some of these, the Irish and some of these other groups, they didn't like that too much. And so then you have some animus there, you know, coming against it. So anyway, my point
here's
is.
What's interesting about that. Even though they didn't like that, because now they had new competition, so that's true. The crazy thing is, the Irish and especially the Sicilians had been left out of the white club. They weren't waspy enough. When you come to the Sicilians, there's even a distinct different look that's not exactly like Europeanish enough, apparently, for wasps' taste, right? And what happened is, though, the arrival of all the black folks into those cities in the North and the Midwest caused the non-white European people like the Irish Italians to get bumped up a notch, and they got concluded on the periphery of this white box. It's a wild thing. I know it sounds weird, but again, there's history to this. There's a book about it called Are Italians White? There's another book called White Upon Arrival. These are both books on
sound like a critical race theorist. You better be careful.
The second you mention tearing down a Confederate statue, by the way, I'm talking about by vote of a city council, not some yahoo, you know what I'm saying? That kind of thing. That people say you're a Marxist, right? But this is just facts, right? So they got bumped up into sort of the white box. So even though they were animus, like they were also like, hey, thanks guys for coming up here. Now we're in the club because you guys came. So they're like, we'll take you guys. The white delegation will take the Sicilians because we definitely ain't taking those other dudes. You know?
Right. Y'all got promoted, man. You know what I'm saying? Y'all moved the chain a little bit.
But look at this.
Actually,
go ahead, finish.
Reflected in what you're saying is actually reflected in, like, you know, the way that the census was conducted and things like that.
Yep.
The racial categories that you see on the census, you see them, you know, changing towards your point. But yeah, I mean, so what I'm trying to say is, I mean, it wasn't just Southerners that were racist. I'm saying it wasn't that wasn't the only place where that underpinning of the slavery institution, and also economically. Let's keep it real. I'm saying if you I mean, there's a book called The Half That Was Never Told, where Edward Baptist gets into, you know, the economics of slavery and how it extended, you know, beyond the North. I mean, beyond the South. I mean, America's Industrial Revolution was clearly a linchpin of our ability to move into the 20th century, you know, with some momentum and become the economic power that we are. Now, what was the earliest, I guess, face of the Industrial Revolution? The textile industry, right? Now, where did they get the materials for the textile? Well, they got it from down south. You know what I'm saying? That cotton coming up.
King Cotton.
King Cotton.
Until the bull weevils.
Right. So the North, you know what I'm saying, was profiting, you know what I'm saying, is from the slavery as well. So on both ends, I think there's some revisionism going on. I think on the one end, the South is trying to make themselves seem like they weren't the bad guy, and the North is trying to make them seem the kind of heavy-handed and seem like they were the only bad guys. Mm-hmm. And actually, the truth is somewhere in the middle. We can get into the banking institutions, how they profited from slavery and all that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah, it's ironic. America wanted to tell black folks you don't have any value, but they were very valued.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? You see what I'm saying?
Right.
And that's why they would go to great lengths to be like all the way into Ohio to recapture slaves. But Jennifer says this, we take this personally because it's not just white people, it's Southern heritage. Now, this is literally lost cause mythology. We know what happened because our great-great-grandfathers told us black, brown, white didn't matter. They fought tyranny.
Wow.
So there's the idea of the war of northern aggression. But Robert E. Lee did have some negative things to say about black people. I'm gonna bring up a quote here, but I'm gonna let you guys deal with this while I find out if that's okay.
Well, I mean, again, she seems to, and I'm trying to be kind. I mean, this is the reason why we're doing this show that we talked about earlier, right? We have to, particularly in the body of Christ, we don't want people to be bound by the lies of the enemy in such a way that they can't walk rightly towards their brother, or sister in Christ. I'm saying, and when you have erroneous ideas that that spring from deception, then it really does impact your sanctification walk, if you will. You know what I'm saying? So, in terms of this notion of just being Southern heritage, listen, again, I grew up in the South. You know what I'm saying? I grew up in the South. I mean, I'm from Virginia. That's where I still live now. And I can tell you that when it comes to this heritage notion, I'm not saying, you put it this way, I recognize that Southern history is complicated. I recognize that, there's this idea that, well, we aren't a monolith. Hey, whatever, fine. At the end of the day, you still have to deal with the fact that your Constitution was, specified that you were trying to uphold Negro slavery. You have to deal with that specification, not me. You know what I'm saying? You also have to deal with the fact that at the end of the day, you have miscegenation laws, right? Where you have, black men and black women. Black men and, people of different races couldn't marry and so forth, right? So that militates against the Imago Dei and what God's word says about people. Regardless of how you construe it, the Southern, put it this way, biblical anthropology is very different than Confederate anthropology. By anthropology, I mean the understanding of man. I'm saying the Bible has something to say about man and mankind that diverges from what the Confederate States had to say about man and mankind. So regardless of how you want to spin it, that's a fact. You can't get around that. And if we, as Christians, what we ought to be doing is upholding biblical truth rather than aspects of our culture or what have you that diverge from that biblical truth.
And, a wild example, you mentioned anti-miscegenation laws. This is a case I just found out about from the same author of that book, where you had a black man who had intimate relations with what was said to be at first a white woman. But when they took it to court, the black man was declared not guilty because the white woman was a Sicilian. She was Italian. And so the court said that her relationship with whiteness was unclear. She wasn't unambiguously white. So he wasn't considered guilty of miscegenation because of that. And what's wild? If I was looking at this the other day, the art that came along with the miscegenationist, the anti-miscegenationist lobby or whatever was incredibly disgusting. Like they would have these pictures of like obese, large black woman with these massive lips that would go out to here, and there'd be like a white dude like worshiping at her knees, like a tiny little skinny white guy, and she'd be like this balloon of a woman, like really disgusting art went along with it. And of course, this is also portrayed in The Birth of a Nation. You have a guy who's basically portrayed as kind of a brute beast about to rape a white lady, and the Ku Klux Klan comes in and saves her in The Birth of a Nation. It's a famous scene you can see. And so this is a big thing. And even, someone all the way into the days of, this is getting off a little bit, Harry Truman, he talked about how he didn't really want, his precious little, he didn't really precious white girls to have to sit to some big, in school, in relationship to desegregating things. And so this is a real thing. But let me read this about Robert E. Lee. What he said. This is a quote here. "I have always observed that wherever you find the Negro,
oh, here it is. This is after slavery.
Everything is going down around him. And wherever you find the white man, you see everything around him improving."
Don't hire those Negroes.
Yeah, that's what he said. So you want to speak on it?
See,
Absolutely.
Everything is going down around him. That's what he said, bro.
Like the Confederacy.
yeah, exactly. That's what I like. Yeah. What you got, MJ? You got to explain to them. Go ahead.
First and foremost, those same Negroes, they was whipping your behind in the war. Okay, and that's the only reason why the Confederates. Well, wait a minute. The Union are doing pretty good with colored soldiers.
You talking about the Buffalo soldiers in it?
With the Buffalo soldiers.
Yeah.
Maybe we can find some soldiers stupid enough to fight for their own enslavement and do the same. No, it wasn't working out that way.
I've thought about that, MJ. If I was black in the South during the Confederacy, what would I do if they said you have a chance to fight in the army? And I haven't got it all figured out, but I was kind of thinking, you know what? Because I get why we judge black Confederates. I was kind of like, a chance to fire a gun and own arms, and maybe they'll look at me different after this mess is over. Just maybe. And maybe I could even slip over to the other side at some point. Maybe I'll get captured. I was like, man, if I didn't have certain things going on in my family, I might be like, okay, sign me up. But in the back of my mind, I'd be thinking that. I don't know. I'm just saying. Because it's a complicated issue is what I'm saying. I'm just saying,
Well, I mean, here's the issue. That was during slavery, but I mean, everybody talks about how wonderful Robert E. Lee was, but let's look at his attitude toward the slave after emancipation. And his attitude was an attitude of disenfranchisement of the blacks. No, don't hire them. No, that was a racist attitude. Everywhere you see them going, things are going down. But these same slaves were good enough to fix your house, good enough to pick your cotton, good enough to wash your drawers, all that stuff, but they can't do nothing now to make money.
Raise your kids.
To breastfeed your babies. Come on now.
Yeah, it's real. It's real. Well, let me expel with something too. This is another myth because I think this is like I said, I'm from Virginia, so this comes up a lot. So this notion that you have, say, black slave owners, this notion that you have soldiers in the army who were black, in the Confederate Army that were black. Were there black slave owners? Absolutely. You know what I'm saying? It's not to say that, of course there were. You know what I'm saying? Were there black soldiers that fought on the behalf of the Confederacy? Yes. Now, here's the thing. I'm encouraging people to look at all of these cases, black, white, or whatever, wherever who was involved, through a biblical lens. The real question is whether or not there were black people who owned slaves, whether or not there were black people who fought in the Confederacy. How do you evaluate the cause of the Confederacy in light of the gospel? How do you evaluate the system of chattel slavery in light of what the Bible has to say about the Imago Dei and man stealing and partiality? You know what I'm saying? In this case, on the basis of race and so forth. It's not whether you can't put it this way. You can't have like a they did it too attitude.
No, that's horrible. That's
you
bad
stand before the throne of grace. You're not going to be able to say to Jesus, well, they did it too, or they were just as bad as we were. No. You're saying you're going to be judged based upon God's standard of morality. And so what's
that called? Tu quoque? How do you say that? The tu quoque fallacy. Right. You did it too. Yeah,
you too.
Yeah. It's actually a fallacy. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Because what Jesus can say is like, yeah, they did it too, and they going to hell right along with you. I'm saying because at the end
gasoline
of the day,
draws on.
I mean, at the end of the day, like, stop using man-made categories to base your morality on. Look to the scriptures rather than this, they did it too type of a thing. And I don't mean to beat up on her. I'm just saying that that's just a common objection. I think that people need to expel it.
Well, let's deal with this, Adam. I think I want to say something about this because the live chat is live. Henry Knox.
It's live tonight, man.
Thank you for the super chat, Henry Knox. He says, what percentage of people who are actually thoughtful are out in the protests we see, even though we can distinguish can they and will they? Well, let me say one thing about that. I understand what you're saying, but part of what we're trying to do here tonight, Henry, is to bring thoughtfulness to these discussions. I saw some other people saying if they should be taken down, what manner. Remember, the main thing we're talking about is the myths behind why these were erected and why people have them stay. I think Christians can have some legitimate disagreements about things in the middle, okay? I get all that, right? Some people are just very sort of conserving, like, hey, they're already up there. I wouldn't build them, but let them stay. I'm not saying I agree with that. I'm saying I can see different discussion points, whatever. We're kind of talking about sort of the thing behind the thing and then getting to that conversation second. But Henry, let me say this. That question then, if we're going to go there, can be brought to the other side. What was Charlottesville all about? The so-called unite the right. And I consider myself a conservative libertarian or a libertarian conservative, depending on what day of the week it is. But that's the sort of political basket I kind of end up in, right? Now, so my point is to say, like, I'm not the Marxist guy. I'm not the left. That's not me. It's never been me. But we still got to look at this, right? Regardless of whatever affiliations are. What about the people saying preserve the statue in Charlottesville? Do we want to then say, well, everyone saying preserve the statue is linked up with the people who took their cars and ran into crowds of people and murdered them? That was the unite the right. The guys out there saying the Jews aren't going to replace us. This is the unite the right. What was the guy, Richard Spencer? I mean, these are now. Am I saying that everyone who says preserve the statues agrees with them? No, that's my point though. If we're gonna do it, we got to be able to separate these things out. And whenever you have these mass moods of people, it's kind of like that. There's parsing that needs to happen, and the question is, what ideas will sort of win and drive a movement? So I see people talking about BLM and Marxism, guys. We're just not in that realm tonight. We're trying to have a limited, profitable discussion, and then we can get to those other steps later. But do you think that's a valid point?
Talk about whatever.
Because do you think that's a valid point to bring out what was happening in Charlottesville? Because if we're going to ask this question about, well, who's thoughtful and this and that, because I don't agree. So this is just me. We could have a different discussion. I don't agree with tearing down statues of Grant, at least, especially not in the way in which some people were advocating doing it. That's not what we're saying. Remember, I said Grant because there's some of him getting toppled too. We're talking about pro-Confederate myths tonight, and we're talking about Robert E. Lee statues, stuff like that. Charlottesville, though, that's all I'm saying.
Well, I'm going to be explicit in saying that I think that one of my main concerns with these statues is that I believe it to be an expression of an idolatrous relationship with what they believe to be Southern heritage and the Confederacy. That's really what I'm saying. Now, does that apply to everybody? No. But at the same time, I do think that, I mean, I'm sorry, like we have to, again, ask ourselves, why are we memorializing these individuals? And I think that it's embedded in something that whether people would like it or not, it's far more problematic than what they might want to let on. Like, I mean, so for example, like when I'm from Virginia, like I on my way to high school, I would have every day I traveled along Jefferson Davis Highway. You know what I'm saying? On January 16th or whatever it is, every year, in high school, I didn't have Martin Luther King Day. We had Lee Jackson King Day.
I still can't. When you told me that, I could not believe that, man. I mean, I believe
Lee Jackson King Day.
I just never heard of that. I just like, what?
Bro. I mean, matter of fact, I mean, we can go to some slides, but I mean, I'll go there in a second. But here's the thing. So Lee Jackson King Day, that's what I had. And actually, I went back and checked because I wasn't sure if it was still that. In 2000, they separated them to where now the Monday is Martin Luther King Day and the Friday preceding that is Lee Jackson Day. So they separated them out. You know what I'm saying? But nevertheless, on the books, you still have Lee Jackson Day on the books. It's a holiday. It's a state holiday, right? Matter of fact, can I share my screen right quick?
Yes, you can. I'll bring it up right now. And while you're saying that, just it's bugged out because, you know, I didn't grow up, again, where I grew up, I didn't have a lot of this Robert E. Lee stuff, you know, Robert E. Lee High School. I mean, I get people that do. I don't remember seeing any of that kind of stuff, right? I mean, in my city, there's an Afrocentric school. You know what I'm saying? It's called Afrocentric. Like, there's, right? So it's a different setup, right? However, come out to Arizona, which is very sort of far afield from a lot of the main Civil War things. Some things happened here. I believe that the good, the bad, and ugly actually part of the backdrop of the story with Clint Eastwood is the Civil War out west. But anyways, with that being said, I went down to Tombstone where Wyatt Earp and all that happened. By the way, Wyatt Earp was a Union man. I'm not saying he was perfect, but he was a Union man. And so we go down there, and I'm like, listen to directions when I'm leaving Tombstone. It says turn left on Jefferson Davis Highway. I'm like, what? Why does Arizona down to Tombstone, and Wyatt Earp is the Tombstone guy, and he's a Union guy. Why is there a Jefferson Davis Highway down here? I was like, man, this is gonna come up in the conversation. But anyways, I'm about to share that screen, man. I'm sorry.
No, it's cool, man. But I think it's so important. Again, I mean, as far as his direct question about why, do we know what percentage of who, I mean, of course not. I mean, we can't do it. I'm not trying to be funny, but we can't do a head count and see who's, thoughtful and who isn't. But I think that's the importance of these discussions, though. I'm saying because we want to, right, for Christians, we want to add a biblical, critical thinking element to it. Because if we don't do it, then Umar Johnson's going to do it, or Brother Polite's going to do it. I'm saying they're going to, have their take on this kind of stuff. And the whole point is, we want to engage the public square from a thoughtful biblical standpoint. So, in my view, just to make it clear, maybe I should have said this earlier, I'm not for just, vandalizing and tearing down statues. Like, what I'm for is actually in the case of Charlottesville, you had a locality who, went through the proper channels and decided to remove Robert E. Lee. I think that's the way that it should happen. And if it comes about that way, then nobody should have a problem with it. I mean, that's just what it is, But anyway, I just want to say, also, happy belated Confederate Memorial Day to everybody. Happy belated Confederate Memorial.
Thanks,
Did you guys know?
I didn't know what I missed, man. Thank you, bro.
You missed it, bro. You've been missing it for years. You don't know what you've been missing, man. Confederate Memorial Day is a real thing. It is still recognized as a state holiday in Texas, Alabama, Mississippi, South Carolina, and I put an asterisk next to Georgia, Florida, and North Carolina because it's recognized as a legal holiday, or sometimes they'll put it in some sites that I saw that, it's recognized in terms of they'll observe it locally, but it's not technically recognized as a state holiday per se. You know what I'm saying? But nevertheless, you had in those other states, it's just flat out, it's a state holiday, right? And now, matter of fact, I should have put Virginia up here because we also used to commemorate Confederate Memorial Day up until this year, where they decided to change it to Election Day, and they took Confederate Memorial Day off the books. But not just that. If you missed out on Confederate Memorial Day, don't despair, because you have some other opportunities to celebrate the Confederacy. We also have Lee Jackson Day. Well, actually, that's passed. We have Robert E. Lee Day. We have a whole plethora. We have Nathan Bedford.
Who celebrates Nathan Bedford Forrest Day? For real?
Tennessee. Just as a matter of fact, it was last year.
That's the founder of the Klan.
He was the first Grand Wizard of the Klan. And in Tennessee last year, there was a vote as to whether or not they would continue to recognize the holiday, and they decided that they will continue to recognize Nathan Bedford Forrest Day as a holiday.
Wait, is this in the whole state, or just like one podunk town or something?
No, it's a state holiday.
Man, get out of here!
Nathan Bedford Forrest Day, bro. There's the big homie Nate Bedford Forrest right there at the bottom.
Wait, he's got his statues too?
He's got a statue right there.
Where is that? What is going?
That's a big old statue.
I got Robert Lee up top. I got Stonewall Jackson to the left, and I got my man Nathan Bedford Forrest to the right.
And you know what? By the way, putting someone on a horse is a big deal because that's like a symbol of power and victory. By the way,
nobility. You know what I'm saying? So now here's what's interesting. Side note. I know personally, I guess it would be either the great grandson or somewhere a descendant of Nathan Bedford Forrest. I personally know the guy. He's a sold out believer Christian, and actually has spent most of his ministry life as a missionary to Africans. Which I think is fascinating.
Are you for real?
Yeah, he actually has. Well, I don't want to put his name out there, but he actually is the namesake of I think I use that term right. But they share elements of the same name. I'm saying, but he's actually a missionary. Spent much of his ministry time as a missionary to Africa, among other places. I'm saying, but yeah, it's direct descendant. So it's also to see how the gospel can, redeem even the genealogy as heinous, as Nathan Bedford Forrest was. Now, for people who don't know who Nathan Bedford Forrest is, I mean, this guy was as a matter of fact, I mentioned Fort Pillow earlier. There's this controversial event that takes place during the Civil War. It's often called the Fort Pillow Massacre, where you had Nathan Bedford Forrest, who was who led a regiment to attack Fort Pillow. Supposedly there were people who surrendered and they got slaughtered anyway. Among them was a large number of African Americans. There's first-hand accounts that would attest to that. Of course, the South says that didn't happen. Nevertheless, if it didn't happen that way, Nathan Bedford Forrest goes on to be the first Grand Wizard of the KKK, and whatever he didn't do at Fort Pillow, I'm certain he made up for it, as a leader of the KKK. And he's commemorated, with his statue and a state holiday in Tennessee to this day. Now, I say that to say, we're not dealing with just some sort of remembering of history.
This is important. It seems like we got to say this 1,000 times, but make it 1,001, bro.
I'm not saying no thoughtful person, certainly nobody here on this panel is saying that these individuals need to be, erased from the history books. Nobody's saying that they shouldn't be taught about. No, I'm not even saying that people can't honor them if they want, I guess, in their own personal spaces. If you want to put a picture of Nathan Bedford Forrest up in your living room, I mean, by all means, you know what I'm saying? Put him right next to John F. Kennedy and MLK if you want. You know what I'm saying? That's, you know what I mean? So nobody's saying that. What I am saying is, in public spaces, again, going back to Mario, do we want to honor enemies and or traitors? And then B, when we think about what these people represent, we're talking about people who were straight up murdered,
losers,
enslavers. They lost the freaking war, man.
They got whooped.
You don't get a participation trophy in this kind of thing.
This is not the YMCA. Come on now.
Right. What are you celebrating? Now, here's the thing. I'm trying to be as nuanced as I can. I think what happens is that you do have some people who think that Southern heritage is all about slavery. And I think we can be nuanced and say that there are elements of Southern living and heritage that, like in terms of like the food they eat, the music that they believe to be part of their heritage. Obviously all cultures are complex, right? The issue here, though, is that slavery, chattel slavery specifically, and the racism that undergirded it was a definitive aspect of that Southern culture. You can't get around that. It's literally inescapable. I'm saying that's what they were about. They put it in their constitution. Their leaders were all about it. They were very adamant about that. Okay. So in public spaces, do we want to honor people who are emblematic of racism and chattel slavery? No healthy republic should. That's my argument. Healthy republic should honor people who are enemies, traitors, and emblematic of racism and chattel slavery. And if you think otherwise, then, I don't know what to tell you. I literally don't know what to tell you. And for anybody who's, the flag doesn't mean that. I know, Vocab, you said something about the flag. I got one more slide here.
Yeah, because I saw some people bringing up, we do need to talk about this.
Yeah. The I want to give a shout out. I want to give a shout out to the homie, Strom Thurmond. You know what I'm saying? Real quick. Strom Thurmond was an avowed racist. We all know the man was a racist. And so during your your civil rights, pre-civil rights era, basically throughout the Jim Crow era, I'll put it that way, you had a segment of the Democrats who wanted to ardently and just continuously oppose civil rights legislation, right? And so I guess the Democrats wasn't getting the job done, so they started a separate group called the Dixiecrats, of which Strom Thurmond was their first shot at the president. He was their guy. He was going to position for the presidency. Strom Thurmond and the Dixiecrats was their symbol. That Confederate battle flag. That was their symbol.
Hold on, I need to make sure everyone heard what he just said. Everyone, now I know it's just Adam on the screen with the picture. That is not the Confederate flag. That's the Confederate battle flag. So if you watch a Civil War movie, that's the flag they take, generally speaking, into the battle as they do the rebel yell and the da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da and all that stuff. And the reason is because that's their battle flag. And what's so crazy is people aren't just flying the Confederate flag. They're flying the Confederate battle flag, bro. Literally went into the United States and killed U.S. soldiers.
Bro, listen to this.
Jabari.
Oh, yeah.
It's like Jabari when he said he was wearing those special colors when he was.
I have red and black on family today to call down the gods of war and debate.
Yeah, come on now.
But it's style though. But anyway, so but you mentioned the rebel yell, which I forgot to mention this. So King's Dominion. Now I don't know if it's still there or not. I suspect it probably is, and I could be wrong about that. But I know when I was growing up, the big amusement park for at least regionally for us to go to was King's Dominion. Anybody who's from Virginia knows about King's Dominion. Now, their mainstay roller coaster was this one of those old wooden joints that could either go backward or forward. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? You could either ride backwards or forward. It was called the Rebel Yell. Mm-hmm. That was the name of the roller coaster. Mm-hmm. That was their featured roller coaster for the longest. So growing up, we would all get excited like, "Oh man, I go to King's Dominion. I'm gonna go to the Rebel Yell." I had no idea what it meant.
And after that, let's get on the Nathan Bedford Forrest merry-go-round.
Right. That's what I'm saying. So it's like people have to get it right. So when you think about it, they're celebrating the rebel yell, right? Well, what were the rebels yelling about? They're yelling about going into battle against the Union, which is what we're currently they were later on grafted into, right? That's what they were yelling about. right? This is what they're celebrating. So anyway, my whole point is, with the Dixiecrats here, they took on the Confederate battle flag as their flag, representative of the Dixiecrat Party, which was founded. The Dixiecrat Party was founded to oppose civil rights legislation, right? So, I mean, just ask the question: why did this particular group, given their overall mission, why did they see fit to choose the Confederate battle flag? It's emblematic of something. You know what I'm saying? At least to them. So people can't act like, oh, well, it's not about slavery or it's not about racism. When, I could bring up pictures of Dylan Roof right now. You know what I'm saying? Where he's like flaunting
him holding the Confederate battle flag. Yeah.
Right. So it's not just in our heads, that there's something problematic about the battle flag. Racists, you know what I'm saying, on so many occasions, use it for their own imagery. So we're not like chasing ghosts here. So I just wanted to say, man, like, I mean, I would ask people, like, what are we really celebrating?
Hey, man,
what do we commemorate?
Facts on that. There was I know in the West they call it a swap meet, right? But where I grew up in a little, like the south end of Columbus, they called them, sorry, I'm just gonna they called them flea markets, right? And I went to the flea market one time, and there was this table selling shirts, and everybody was in there, right? There's all kinds of people, is what I'm saying by that. But there were some folks who, because in the south side of Columbus, there was a lot of folks who would come up from Appalachia, right? What people sometimes disparagingly call hillbillies, not rednecks, hillbillies, right? And so there was a lot of Appalachian roots in that part of town. And so I was there, and there's this table that had some, like, really, let's just say, politically incorrect shirts. And I expressed interest in them to kind of see what was going on here, what else they had. And she was like, oh, you like that one? Let me show you this one. And pulled out from underneath the table, bro, a shirt. This is around when everybody was rocking the X hats in high school, right? Pulled out a shirt that said, you have your X, I have mine. And had a picture of the rebel battle flag on it. Like, because of X. And I was like, oh, right. What else you got? Right? She pulls out another one. This is true stories, right? This is Chris Crowder. Pulls out another one, bro, and it says the original Boys in the Hood. And it's got a picture of a Klansman. And these were the shirts underneath the table. And I was just like, okay.
Wow.
This is a true. He's slinging these joints at the swap meet, bro.
Speaking of the Klansmen, do we want to talk about Birth of a Nation? You want to touch on that, or what you want to do?
Well, I was looking through the live chat, but yeah, talk about Birth of a Nation because we've mentioned it a bunch of times.
That's my last slide anyway.
And by the way, Shawnee Miller had a great quote. I kind of lost it now. I got to go back to that quote, Shawnee Miller. She said, it's sad about some Christians, they'll, hold on, where'd it go? I do got to get this quote. Okay, here. It's funny that pro-Confederate Christians fawn over these slave-owning and slavery-defending folks, but when you bring up all of their favorite history, all of their faves history, it's you should only be concerned about the gospel. Saying, you know what I'm saying?
Wow.
And look,
that's tough.
I'm not trying to just come for throats or anything, but James White was talking about, if Robert E. Lee could see us now, he would spit at our modern culture. And I'm like, why is Robert E. Lee's approval relevant to the continuation of the God? Why do I care? Like,
who cares, bro?
Everything's going down around the black men and wash their backs with Brian and get rid of him and don't hire him. That Robert E. Lee? I don't care what he spits at. Like, what are you talking about, man? That was such an odd thing, as if that's a standard bearer for gospel continuity and stuff. And then,
but
go ahead, man.
You know what's interesting about that though? So because if I remember correctly, James White said something to the effect of, he alluded to Planned Parenthood in that segment. He also alluded to homosexuality as well. Which I find interesting because with Planned Parenthood, at least, you're talking about the loss of life. I'm saying now, as far as Robert Lee's concerned, he's preserving a system. I'm saying that was deadly to African enslaved persons. I'm saying like the life expectancy for an African enslaved person was heinous during that time. I mean, not only did they get all the work they could out of them as possible. I'm saying, like, many of them just didn't live that long. I'm saying, first of all. So you're talking about taking people's lives. Robert Lee Lee's not going to be a standard bearer there. But as far as the family, how many people got sold down the river? How many families were split up during chattel slavery? Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? They didn't care too much about the family, at least not black families anyway.
Nope.
You know what I'm saying? So we're going to talk about family values and what Robert Lee Lee was spit at or whatever. I don't think that Robert Lee Lee is going to be a standard bearer. You know what I'm saying? He's not going to be your shining lighthouse of righteousness. You know what I'm saying? To spit on anybody. You know.
Yeah. Real quick, and I know you're going to get a birth of the nation, but someone brought this point up, and I'm so glad you did. Tracy L77. The Fugitive Slave Act was passed in 1850, an act that allowed the southern states to invade the northern states and overrule their laws. And that's true. They had to overrule their local laws. The South being for states' rights and a lie. And there you see the sheer hypocrisy. The South can go into the North and overrule local laws because of the Fugitive Slave Act and get their slaves back. Right? That's a great point that I love to bring out. It shows the hypocrisy of the whole institution. But go ahead, man. What you got?
I mean, yeah, it's actually, I mean, hypocrisy. But on top of that, I mean, think of how whack it is to where you're the one that secedes from the Union. You strike, you take first blood and all this sort of a thing, right? So you're the one that's popping off. And then when you take that L, all of a sudden, like, well, there's no way we could have won it, man. I tell you, there's no way that we would have won. We were outgunned, we were outnumbered. It was just a lost cause. It was just, we fought valiantly, but that's about as best we could do. No, you wasn't thinking that when you went up to Gettysburg. I'm saying you wasn't thinking that when you popped off and seceded from the Union. You was ready to bust off in the beginning. All of a sudden, when you lose, now it's all of a sudden, oh well, it was a lost cause. There's nothing we could have done about it. Well, you didn't assess that on the front end. You know what I'm saying? You didn't think that through.
Yeah, they thought they were going to whoop the North. There's a heavy popular sentiment of like, we're the tough ones. We know how to shoot, do this, X, Y, Z. Right. But the North being like all industrialized is not exactly true. Then one interesting thing that was in Gods and Generals was that Maine regiment that was led by Jeffrey Bridges, or the guy in Dumb and Dumber or whatever. You remember that, MJ? The Maine guys were rural and as agrarian as a lot of the Southerners. You know what I'm saying? Oh, Lord, yeah. So just bringing out the point, like, they thought they were going to win. And, Pickett's charge, people memorialized that. Like...
James White does.
The Pickett's charge is not a good thing. It wasn't good.
He was talking...
For anybody, and they call that there's a name for that. The South give. I think it's called the high point of the Confederacy. There's some name they give to it because it's like that last final push of when they almost got through the line. Pickett's charge should not be memorialized. It's not a good thing. Anyway,
it's terrible, man. It's terrible.
Did he really? Did he wait? Did he really give it a shout out like that? What did he say, bro?
Oh, he did. Yeah, he definitely.
He was talking about
how brave they were and just
he was talking about how. Yeah. He went from talking about the worthless money that the Confederacy had. That paper wasn't worth a dime, and that's another reason why they started pillaging.
Wait, what do you mean? What do you mean he's talking about? What did he say about it? Was he saying it was cool, or what do you mean?
Oh, he was talking about just the memories that he had as a kid owning Confederate money, how it was crinkly and things like that, and how he would go up to Pickett's charge. Dr. White, that money wasn't worth anything, and that's one of the reasons why they would start pillaging U.S. citizens up there and start stealing and pillaging and ravaging.
The fake money is probably worth more now than the real money back then.
That's like being a German citizen in between World War I and World War II, because inflation hit Germany really hard. I remember, we had to take wheelbarrows full of money just to buy a loaf of bread, man. It's just like, because that's what they had to literally do. They're taking wheelbarrows full of money because of inflation to buy just a loaf of bread. But I didn't realize So what did he say about Pickett's charge?
Well, he was saying how it was impressive that they took such a stand and almost made it, and so on and so forth. Like he was kind of in
awe.
Did
he want them to win?
I don't know what he wanted, man.
This was all based off of stories that his grandparents would tell him. Let me let some people know this. Your grandparents are not a good source of history. Please go read some books if you want to know about history. Statues don't tell history either. People interpret statues just like they try to interpret the fossil strata. Come on now. Let's just be consistent here.
But it's true. Like a lot of people have been lied to, man. You know what I'm saying? And that's really what we're doing. It's like, people have been lied to about the Confederacy. All right. I think that's a real deal. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, anyway.
We got a couple more things to get to, but I'm going to go here since you brought up about grandparents and all this. I don't think I've ever told this story publicly. So I grew up in Ohio, which was pretty union, okay? Not that it's perfect or whatever, but and I grew up in Columbus. So it was, I saw a lot, and it was a good. I'm glad I grew up that way. But I had family in the South, specifically, especially Birmingham, but especially Montgomery. And the family members I'm talking about are no longer alive, but they were related by marriage further back, and I would go down to Alabama, and I was young, so we're talking I might have been 7 to 11 when these occurrences primarily happened. And a couple family members in particular, especially one, would always make fun of me. And remember, I'm a child. I'm 7 to 11 for my dark skin, because I know how I look now, but when I was younger, I was outside a lot, and I get dark. I get pretty dark. Like even being part Sicilian, like some of us can get really dark. I could get really dark. So I actually don't go outside that much living in Arizona because the heat's ridiculous. I'm lighter than I could look easily, but just going outside. I don't mean tanning or spraying. I don't mean nothing like that. Just going outside and rocking. So I was really dark, and he called me the N-word. And I don't mean he sometimes called me. To him, he thought it was funny. So he's an older man, Southern gentleman all the way, right? You know, very, and he would take me to museums of the Confederacy. I remember going to these museums, and he would show me, you know, look at this. But he thought it was funny to joke and call me the N-word. So I was called the N-word as a child by my own great grandpa. And I would, and as a kid, you know, when you're 8 years old, you don't necessarily know how to argue against that.
Poor child.
So I didn't know what to say. So I would just say, well, Grandpa, I know I'm dark, but look at my palms. And you know what he said? He said, the N's got white palms too, son.
Oh my God.
I kid you not. That is what he said to me. And again, you can't really kind of make these kind of stories up, right?
Oh,
you know, I'm not,
right.
I'm not plagiarizing someone else's life. This is so
This is real
I
life.
saw, and this is where people who I loved and are supposed to love me, and it was funny to them. Like he wasn't the only one. There was mainly two to do this kind of thing and say this kind of thing, right? But it was traumatizing for a while for me as a kid, because I remember some of the subsequent conversations I would have with my mom about it, and it was not a easy thing to deal with. But
Can I answer a question from the chat?
Yeah.
Or
yes, you can.
So I don't know if we would call out people's names or not, but. Somebody said, Adam Coleman, are you saying it wasn't impressive? Are you saying that they weren't brave? Can people not respect their enemies' tenacity and courage? Now, this is very interesting. So, and I'm going to make this real quick. So in Scripture, what we see is that all moral values aren't the same. You know what I'm saying? So, for example, like with Rahab, like when the spies come in and she lies in order to protect them, you know what I'm saying? At that time, preservation of life was a higher order moral value than telling the truth to those who would have killed the Jewish spies, right? Now, I said that to say this. When it comes to notions like bravery, tenacity, and what else did he say? Courage and tenacity, I think that those values are contextual. You know what I'm saying? Is it true that these people risked their lives to obtain an end, and in that sense they were brave? If you're going to define bravery that way, then fine. However, what I'm saying is within the context, exhibiting that kind of bravery within the context of trying to preserve the system of chattel slavery and racism, that makes that bravery and courage and tenacity not laudable. You know what I'm saying? In my book, I'm saying at the end of the day, like you can say, in other words, bravery for bravery's sake is not necessarily something that is laudable. Because if you're going to say that, gangbangers are brave, the Nazis were brave. The Japanese who were running it, they're playing the kamikazes. They were brave. I mean, really for any war. So if we're going to use that metric, then really bravery kind of loses the meaning that I think people want to assign to it. I think that bravery within the context of a cause is worthy. Right. That's what makes something really laudable. And so that if I can be nuanced there, that's what I'm referring to.
Amen. That's good. By the way, Aaron made a correction. He was saying that battle flag was the Army of Northern Virginia, and other armies had different ones. So thank you for that correction, Aaron. I think he's right on that. I think I know exactly what he's talking about. So that battle flag is Army of Northern Virginia battle flag, which is kind of the main one, not necessarily all the rebels battle flag, but nonetheless the main point is the battle flag. But thank you, Aaron. All right. So what else do we need to get to in the slides? Because we should wind this down. We had a lot of fun. I think we've dealt with a lot of issues. We didn't get to everything, but go ahead, Adam.
Well, so just one more, I think will kind of bring home like what I'm trying to get at. So when we were talking about, I got it up there now with the birth of a nation, right? All right,
I'm gonna put it up right now, bro. Go ahead.
All right, I'm just gonna read a piece of our article. The birth of a nation was literally like this groundbreaking piece of cinema, unfortunately, and it really is. It's an adaptation from a book and a play that came out before it that was called The Klansman. As a matter of fact, in its first screenings, it was called The Klansman. And it's all about this idea of, white people standing up against the savage black threat amongst them, if you will. I'm saying that's really what the whole movie is about. And really, I mean, this movie is credited with pretty much reviving the KKK, which it kind of, began to drizzle out a little bit. But this movie right here kind of engendered that white knight sentiment to such an extent that it actually, again, like I said, it was kind of like a shot in the arm for the KKK, and then you see a rise. But I also want to read this right quick. I think this is interesting. So, released on the 50th anniversary of the last full month of the Civil War, Griffiths, it was a D.W. Griffith, was the one who made Birth of a Nation. Griffith's monument became a groundbreaking, popular, technical, and critical success, so referring to the Birth of a Nation, produced for $100,000 and charging a top price of $2 when tickets, most movies cost a dime. The Birth of a Nation was the seminal blockbuster of the silent film period and the most widely seen of all motion pictures until it was eclipsed by another Civil War epic, Gone with the Wind. In 1939, Griffith's film, 1939. Griffith's film is estimated to have earned $18 million in its first few years, the astounding equivalent of $1.8 billion today. In current dollars,
this is a blockbuster, is what he's saying. By the way.
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
this is Star Wars before Star Wars.
OG blockbuster right here. As a matter of fact, it says that in current dollars, only Avatar and Titanic have earned more worldwide. Now, here's the reason why I wanted to read that, is because when we think about what is it about memorializing the Confederacy in this movie? I'm saying, what is it about depicting, these white knights of the KKK and dispensing of the black savages? What is it about that would cause, that resonated with people so much that it's earned $1.8 billion and earned $18 million within its first few years, right? That says something. It's not just, so we have to understand that this thread of racism, right, that undergirded the Confederacy and their war effort is not disconnected from the broader society. I'm saying this movie was able to gain traction because there's this common sentiment that obviously people seem to rock with. In other words, the celebration of the evilest parts, really, of the Confederacy is far more embedded in our society than I think people would like to let on. And that's something that we should all oppose, right? Like, we should all oppose pervasive sin, pervasive partiality on whatever basis. I mean, racial or otherwise. We should all oppose that. I'm saying, and so, in the same way that I'm not going to go buy me a ticket, to the Birth of a Nation. I'm saying, to continue.
You're not going to go buy me a ticket.
Yeah, right.
Adam, the funny part to me is when we talk about these Confederate monuments and the flags and the symbols. Okay, in the context of their day, these were democratic symbols, okay, of the Democratic Party. But the main people who seem to want to defend them, and there's a really bad reason why they want to defend them, are folks on the right.
Oh, that's a funny point. You're saying if we're just going to talk politics, I've never actually heard that argument. That's kind of funny. You're saying if we're just going to talk politics, hey, you Republicans that are with us, why are you going to defend a bunch of negative aspects of a Democratic legacy? That's a good argument.
Let me add on, because then they'll come back and then talk about how they're the party of Abraham Lincoln. And we're anti-slavery.
Yeah. You got mixed signals.
What are we doing here?
Got some mixed signals. Consistent inconsistencies.
It's a sign of a failed argument.
Yeah,
we're having too much fun talking about this. That's good though. My man Aaron said he actually used to lead tours over there at Gettysburg and gave us a super chat. Thank you for that. And he said that if you saw the launch point of Pike's Charge or whatever it was called, that you could see how stupid it was, so how bad of an idea it was, and said Lee was overrated. And I think that's true. And this is why I still wanted to watch the Gettysburg movie, despite Gods and Generals being kind of like a pro. Because I watched them out of order. I watched the Gods and Generals first, being like pro-Confederate propaganda. They show Pickett's Charge, and it seemed like a lot of the guys knew like Gettysburg wasn't going to work. They were going to lose, and Pike's Charge or Pickett's Charge, now I'm getting all confused, was not going to work either, but it was basically their only shot. You know what I'm saying? That's my understanding of what it is. But either way, I don't know why we would think it's such a great... I mean, I would not have wanted them to break through. Like, if Lee would have been, like, maybe a little bit worse of a general tactically, the war would have been over sooner. I would have hoped for that. Not that he's this great tactical guy, running incursions into Pennsylvania.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, it cost people's lives. I mean, like I said, it's the bloodiest war America's ever fought. Like to this day. There's no doubt about it. To this day.
Yeah, they lost almost or more, I forget the numbers, people at Gettysburg than in the whole Vietnam War, to put it in perspective. The numbers are comparative. I forget the exact numbers. Maybe Aaron Larson knows. He seems to know quite a bit about the Civil War. The numbers are very comparative with how much the United States lost in the Civil War with just what happened at Gettysburg.
I mean, in our lifetimes, like they just passed, like I want to say, like maybe between the last 5 or 10 years, they just passed in terms of losses in wars. They just passed the number that was lost in the Civil War. I mean, if you take all the other wars put together, all the wars and conflicts put together, we just passed, how many was lost in the Civil War, like fairly recently, I'd say within the last 5 to 10 years.
Let's deal with this. Synagogue says Gods and Generals isn't pro-Confederate propaganda. That's just false. And Lee was a brilliant general. This is indisputable.
Okay.
First of all, Grant gets overlooked in the discussions. The Southern sympathizers are so heavy they forget how efficient Grant was, number one. But even with that being said, the Gettysburg is an example of a massive failure. And guess what he is reported to have said, although he never repeated it again. At the end of the battle, he was walking by muttering to the troops, "It was all my fault. It was my fault. It's my fault." And they even portray that, even in the Gettysburg movie. They actually portray that. They show them, there's numerous records that he said "It's my fault," right? Never said it again. He seemed to be a rather proud man, to be honest. They had to coax him to sign the like kind of allegiance he had to do, the sort of, I forget what it's called, but there's an allegiance he had to make to the United States afterwards. They had to kind of coax him in all this. He seemed to be a very, very, very pride man. He never expressed regret for what he did or all the lives lost. You know what I'm saying? Just I was carried along by Virginia. You know what I'm saying? And how is he going to say Gods and Generals isn't pro-Confederate propaganda, bro?
I don't know, man. But what's fascinating? It just occurred to me just now. So, like, Vocab, you were at here in Hampton, Virginia. Not that long ago. You did that video out there. We did a video at the same spot. And it was actually the same spot where Jefferson Davis was in prison. You know what I'm saying? Right after the loss of the Civil War. And what's interesting is that when they bring him here to Hampton, Virginia, here's what's interesting about it. They marched him between 2 rows of soldiers. It was called the Traitors March. That's what it was called, the Traitors March. You know what I'm saying? When they brought him in shackles, they marched him through the Traitors March. And then like a couple of days later, they actually had his feet shackled, you know what I'm saying, which was supposed to be like a dishonor to somebody of his stature or whatever, Right. But I mean, he was given a traitor's march, right? He was understood to be a traitor. And right now you can drive down a road that's named after him, relatively near, maybe just, a couple miles down the road from me right now. So we have a traitor that we have roads named after and so on and so forth, right? I mean, just really think of how hypocritical, I'll just say how inconsistent that is.
Yeah, we talked about what happened to John Brown.
Yeah,
he was hung, man. We hang traitors.
He says he wants to know how Gods and Generals is pro-Confederate propaganda. Well, especially the conversation. There's a conversation there between 2 black men at one point. One is the cook of Stonewall Jackson, and another guy he's in the Confederacy because his quote master went into the war, but he corrects the other person, the cook, and says, "Oh no, I was freed, and he's not my master, he's my boss. He pays me regular wages. He let me go." And basically was talking about how great this guy was, this Confederate general that this other man had followed into the world. So the 2 black guys are talking. The one's the cook, and the one is the one who apparently has such an enlightened Confederate master that he's not a master. He's just it's a boss-employee relationship, and he pays him good money, and so he follows him in there. And yet it's like a ridiculous scene. I'm like, this is what they're portraying, like. This is how they're portraying it. And then they also have lots of Confederates give these impassioned speeches in the movie about why they're doing what they're doing and all this kind of thing. But rarely do you see much of a place where you have a Northerner give a similar kind of motivation for that. There is an exception. And I actually posted this recently on Twitter about a week ago. I watched the movie and I live tweeted about 4 or 5 scenes from it. And it's where Jeff Bridges, the Dumb and Dumber guy, he's a great actor, character, gives his rationale, and he says it is about slavery and it's only worth it if, for him, this cause was only worth it. It was about eradicating slavery to bring freedom. He said that's the only thing that can make this war worth it, right? And so we're not saying it's 100%, but yeah, it is. And look here, Aaron Larson, who seems to know a lot about this, says, yes, Grant was a great general, usually underrated. Don't remember exact numbers, but Korea and Vietnam are roughly the same magnitude as Gettysburg by itself. So thank you for that, Aaron. I'm glad we got some knowledgeable people in there. But guys, we should probably wind up. So final words or final slide you need to show, Adam, and then MJ, final words, and let's wrap this up however you want to wrap it up.
Well, yeah, man. I mean, I think this is an important discussion. I hope it's one that we keep having. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm just trying to keep that same energy, man. I mean, I believe that identity-based idolatry is a real issue for people of various backgrounds and what have you. And my call is I'm calling people back to the gospel. You know, I say it all the time, and I don't mean to be repetitive or redundant, but if you take a feature of who you are and make it the foundation of who you are, then I think it's inevitable that you'll engage in some sort of idolatry and not walk rightly with your fellow man. So rather than doing that, what we need to do is be making sure that we have the firm foundation of our identity in Christ, being made in the Imago Dei. That needs to be our foundation from a biblical standpoint so that we don't get off track. And so in any way that racism, ethnocentrism, and I'm talking about, I literally mean for anybody. I mean, I have the same conversation with black people all the time. I mean, I'm equal opportunity with it. Anybody can get that. That is what it is. But when it applies to nationalism, and in this case, the Confederacy, I'm seeing the same problem, and we need to give, basically kind of, let people know about it so that Christians, what I'm saying, can walk rightly with their fellow man and with God. And we ought not to have idols of any sort, and so, yeah, man, I'm just glad we had this discussion, man. And check me out on TrueIDApologetics.com, TrueIDApologetics.com, TrueIDApologetics. My YouTube page. I got my man Matt Salee supposed to be coming up tomorrow. So real. We're gonna be talking about his book. And also check me out this Saturday. I'm gonna be on Epiphany Fellowship's Facebook page, doing a presentation on Black atheism. So got some stuff coming up, man, and love y'all, man. I'm glad we had a good time, and I'm glad to be here, bro.
Yeah, this is a good discussion. I like to do more stuff like this. Is good, and I do hope people see the intertwining of apologetics, theology, history, all this kind of coming together in this swirling conversation. We're trying to help sort stuff out, but we didn't want to make it, some lecture or something. And hopefully it was helpful to people to get more information. One thing is there was a number of people asking for sources or books. Adam, do you have anything in particular? It could be one resource, anything at all to share that you found helpful. I know MJ will, if you could get those ready, MJ, but anything you want to share? Because I did see some people asking, and I see some people saying, hey, look, I'd like to be educated on this. So I really appreciate. I actually felt like there's a lot of open-minded people in the chat. Jennifer, you were playing the role of a pro-Confederate apologist, so we're not picking on you like we hate you or don't like you. We're trying to have a discussion.
Oh, absolutely.
Nonetheless,
right.
But nonetheless, we're going to take your arguments to task. You're putting forth an argument. It's in the public square. Let's deal with it. But I found, by and large, a pretty very thoughtful, reflective live chat, and I appreciate that. So shout out to the mods. You guys are the ones who make it happen. I'm sorry I don't always give you guys enough credit, but you really help cultivate that, so shout out to y'all. And Adam, if you have anything, and then for MJ as far as sources.
Well, actually, one thing that came to mind, I cited it earlier, was this book by Edward Baptist called The Half That Was Never Told. And he really gets into a lot of detail in regard to how pervasive the issue of slavery was. I mean, it wasn't just something in the South. It wasn't quarantined, in the South. I mean, racism and slavery was really a nationwide problem. And so he really kind of gets into the dynamics of that, going into the banking system, going into even the education system, particularly colleges and so forth, how everything was really just wrapped up in like this and just tentacled by slavery. And so he does a lot of good work there. And actually, you know what? That book I have right in front of me, matter of fact, shoot.
Hey, who is this person, Jay Google, saying you have no scriptures, Floyd, and Floyd about to get the cement ready? I don't know what you're saying, but if you're in some way invoking George Floyd in this, moderators, will you look at a Jay Google and see what he's trying to say? This might need to be a person who needs to be blocked. I don't know if they're trying to call MJ or Adam Floyd. I don't know what they're doing, but look at this person and see what you need to do with him, please, moderators. But go ahead. Somebody, well, I don't know what he's saying unless he's talking to someone in the chat. Floyd, I'm trying to get more information, as they say, but I don't know. It looks like he might be wilding out. Might need to, but go ahead. What else? What were you going to say, bro?
Well, yeah. So, for a lot of people, they struggle with the moral weight of the whole conversation about slavery and so forth. And so a couple things in terms of just from an apologetic standpoint, I definitely would recommend Paul Copan's book, Is God a Moral Monster? Because he gets into some of the tough passages in Scripture, and I think gives us a good starting point to deal with some things. And there's other people as well who write on some of the same subjects, but I think it's an accessible work to kind of cut your teeth on. And also, Clay Jones, he's got a book called "Why Does God Allow Evil?" So maybe people are kind of grappling with that aspect because we didn't really discuss that much. I mean, because that wasn't the intent of our dialogue here. But dealing with the problem of evil, why does God allow evil? I think that in terms of navigating, even in our context, some of those works can be helpful.
Oh, okay, cool. Oh, I see. He's talking to someone actually named Floyd Thompson. Okay, cool. But then even though I was trying to be careful and slow, Jay Google got an attitude. Block me then. Let's put Jay Google on timeout just for that bad attitude. I was saying let's look into it. That's all I was saying. Block me then. Why do people get all that? Why don't they get that way? I don't know. But go ahead, MJ. Break it down, man. What do you want to do?
All right. So I do got some books that everybody can read. One of the foremost authorities on General Robert E. Lee is going to be Elizabeth Brown Pryor. And she has a book on his memoirs, a lot of his letters and memoirs called "Reading the Man." So you got to get that one. A book on the Civil War and the events leading up to the Civil War is "Battle Cry of Freedom" by James McPherson. We also got the Lost Indictment of Robert E. Lee, the Forgotten Case Against an American Icon by John Reeves. We got personal letters by Robert E. Lee called Recollections and Letters of General Robert E. Lee by Robert E. Lee. Okay, so we got his personal letters. We have No Quarter, the Battle of the Traitor. And that's a very important battle, kind of giving you insight on some of the practices of the Confederates toward the Union soldiers, the black Union soldiers as well. By Richard Slotkin. And we also have another good book called Race and Reunion. And this talks about really how the Confederates became popularized and how people began to sympathize with them. So it kind of goes from the events of Reconstruction to the Great Compromise of 1877, when the Republicans abandoned blacks in the South. Okay, I'm throwing that in there for free. To the Civil Rights era. But check that out. And also Eric Forner's book on Reconstruction in America. Be sure to check that out. But they're all thick books. They're going to be some good reads. And just go into it with an open mind. A lot of times we say, hey, watch out for the fake news, liberal media, and things like that. But it was fake. It was a bunch of fake news going on back there, and I would just encourage people to do the same thing that we do when we are, presenting the case for the historical reliability of the resurrection and Christian history and things like that. Let's just be consistent in our methods of historiography. I think Christians are very smart people, and we're capable of doing that if we would be consistent.
No doubt. And Aaron Larson also gives a recommendation I put on the screen. And we mentioned lost cause several times. That actually comes from early Confederate apologists writing. They actually employed the terminology lost cause. And so with that, though, here's some books I recommend that Alfredo turned me on to. So shout out to BK Apologist. The Cause Lost, Myths and Realities of the Confederacy by William C. Davis. There's one I'd like to recommend, and then I have two more besides the one I've been showing as well already. The Myth of the Lost Cause, Why the South Fought the Civil War and Why the North Won. That's by Edward H. Bone Kemper III. And then lastly, I recommend The Myth of the Lost Cause and Civil War History by Gary Gallagher and Alan Nolan, the editors, and I'll show you the cover for that. Actually, I'm having trouble bringing up the cover. Wait, hold on. Well, it's right there. There's the cover for that last one I recommended. So I know that's kind of a lot, but these things become relevant, and maybe we can continue and talk about these issues again another time. But man, you guys, thanks for coming on and all you bring to the table. Very, very good stuff. And Rachel gives a shout out to Will, says thank you, and brother Adam, brother MJ, you guys nailed this live stream. Pure fire, educating the masses on information that's necessary to gain perspective. So praise God. Yeah.
Well, I dropped out about 3 or 4 times. I'm gonna have to go ahead and switch over to my other computer for good. But I hope didn't too many people notice that. But I had fun, Vocab. Thank you for inviting the brother on. Adam, it's always fun when we get together, man.
Of course, man. No doubt, man. I had a blast, bro. We laughed and joked about the Confederacy for like 2 hours, man.
Yeah, this
had a blast.
yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah. Well, you can laugh or cry, but yeah, we try to make it fun, All right. So with that, be sure to join. Let me see here. Tuesday, we got Islamicize Me coming up on the channel, and I'm also going to be on Adherent Apologetics channel. I'll be doing Adam Coleman and MJ Jackson's favorite thing, defending Calvinism, on that channel. Then Wednesday, got a little promo discussion about Islamicize Me. You'll see. Then Thursday, another Islamicizing video. Then Friday, I'm going to be getting into this Hebrew Israelite guy who said he could summon UFOs that a lot of people forgot about. And he's big actually in the ufologist community, but he's a Hebrew Israelite. And so he's passed now, so people don't know about him, but he made quite the footprint. So we're going to be talking about him on Friday. Then Saturday, we're going to be talking about a number of celebrities who seem to be embracing, and not Ice Cube, because we already did the Ice Cube Twitter feed, seem to be embracing key elements of Hebrew Israelism. And when you see who it is and the things they have to say, you're going to scratch your head. So you definitely want to come see that. And then Sunday night, going to do another smoke room. So with that, be sure to join Street Apologist Live again, where we try to make apologetics fun again. Peace.
Street Apologist. Street Apologist. Street Apologist. Street Apologist.